Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ana Rosa Barrera. Ana Rosa Barrera, a 40-year-old woman. She lived in a commune in the Santa Maria department, near Córdoba city, in the province of Córdoba, Argentina. People close to her described Ana Rosa as a courageous and adventurous person who was not afraid to start over and move forward with determination. Reports indicate that Ana Rosa lived in a tent for 4 years, although the reasons for this are unclear. She worked at the Secretariat for Children, Adolescents, and Families in Córdoba, a job she truly enjoyed. Additionally, she and her partner, Marcelo Fabio Ferretto, ran an upholstery workshop together. They met when Ana Rosa started working for Marcelo's business. By 2017, Ana Rosa and Marcelo had been in a 10-year relationship. They shared a common interest in Reiki, a practice that involves using the palms to promote physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. Despite this common point, they still have problems in the relationship. Ana Rosa and Marcelo each have 4 children from previous relationships. As for Ana Rosa's family, her parents, brothers, and sisters reside in Córdoba. About Marcelo, he was a wallpaper maker with a workshop near their home. People close to they described Marcelo as a jealous and controlling person, which annoyed Ana Rosa. On Sunday, May 28th, they visited relatives in Villa Lend, but the trip was marred by a heated argument sparked by Marcelo checking Ana Rosa's phone. The argument continued at their home, with neighbors hearing them shout and insult each other until the early hours of Monday morning. Later that day, Marcelo reported Ana Rosa missing to the police, although the exact timing of the report is disputed in media accounts. Most reports agree that Marcelo filed the report at the 18th police station on Tuesday, May 30th. According to Marcelo, claimed to have woken up at 6 a.m. on Monday to find Ana Rosa already gone, which he thought was unusual since she typically got up early to feed their dogs before leaving the house. He repeated this account to both the police and the media. Marcelo said he last saw Ana Rosa on Sunday night and then Monday night before going to bed. According to some sources, Marcelo realized something was wrong when Ana Rosa's colleagues called him, wondering about her absence. They knew she would never miss work without a good reason. Marcelo recounted the events leading up to her disappearance, saying that on Monday, he came across Ana Rosa's white Chevrolet while running an errand at the local pharmacy. Not long after, police discovered an abandoned car on Rainier Avenue outside a beauty salon in the Santa Isabel neighborhood. The location is about halfway between their home and Ana Rosa's workplace. Inside the car were her belongings and keys, but her cell phone was nowhere to be found. According to Marcelo, he tried to contact her, their friends, and their children also left messages, but no one received a response. The last message Ana Rosa sent via WhatsApp was at 10:40 p.m. Sunday, May 28th. Ana Rosa's relatives all said that the circumstances surrounding Ana Rosa's disappearance are unclear. Marcelo has maintained regular contact with police since filing the report and has also attempted to locate Ana Rosa through social media and news outlets. In an interview with reporters, Marcelo shared Ana Rosa's plans on the day she went missing, which included an early morning swim at a gym and a scheduled appointment with a doctor. Marcelo emphasized that his primary concern is Ana Rosa's safe return home. Prosecutor Legendro Peralta Tanilo of Alta Gracia assumed control of the case, and the investigation commenced. Multiple theories were initially proposed, including the possibility of Ana Rosa being a victim of kidnapping, robbery, or revenge. The option of her leaving voluntarily was also considered. As part of the investigation, Marcelo testified for over 14 hours on Wednesday, May 31st. However, his statements became increasingly inconsistent, raising suspicions among investigators. Marcelo's claims raised suspicions among detectives due to inconsistencies and shifting demeanor. Initially, he was confident and gave frequent interviews, but later emphasized his innocence, providing unsolicited details and justifying himself by discussing his relationship with Ana Rosa. As time passed, Ana Rosa's loved ones became increasingly desperate due to the lack of progress in the search. Meanwhile, the investigative authorities persisted in their efforts to solve the case. The prosecutor leading the investigation was convinced that Marcelo was withholding information and urged the investigators to scrutinize him more thoroughly. On Friday, June 2nd, during another meeting with police officers, Marcelo's demeanor shifted. He became more composed. However, when detectives showed him data from cell phone towers that contradicted his alibi, Marcelo became dismayed and ultimately revealed the truth. He admitted to killing Ana Rosa, running her over, and then dismembering her body to get rid of the evidence. After confessing to the brutal crime, Marcelo revealed the location of the dismembered body of Ana Rosa. Following the Marcelo confession, the police, aided by a canine unit, found Ana Rosa's remains at approximately 2:30 p.m. in a hole dug by Marcelo on a dirt road in the countryside, near a factory. The location was familiar to Marcelo, as he frequently visited the area for work-related purposes. It became clear that Marcelo's previous statements were false, except for his mention of a quarrel that occurred early Monday morning. According to the reconstructed events, Marcelo and Ana Rosa had been arguing the entire weekend before she went missing. Marcelo's intense jealousy sparked the violence. In the heat of an argument, Marcelo used a sledgehammer to hit Ana Rosa multiple times until she died. He then tried to put her body in the car but failed. Instead, he used a knife to dismember her body. He placed Ana Rosa's remains in the car and began moving to her burial site. After pleading guilty, authorities conducted a search of the defendant and Ana Rosa's home on Friday, where they discovered various tools, including machetes and knives of various sizes. Marcelo was then arrested and facing charges of capital murder, a crime that could carry a sentence of life in prison. Prosecutor Peralta Atima explained that the defendant's statement, in which he took responsibility for the crime, was not considered a formal confession. Instead, the record shows that he admitted to the crime during an interview as a witness. A formal statement will be made in the coming days, once sufficient evidence is gathered to support the charges. This evidence will include the final autopsy report, forensic analysis of vehicles and items found during searches, and the results of luminal tests. Marcelo's lawyer, José Luis Saca, stated that the police statement had no legal weight and could not as evidence. Furthermore, the defense announced that the defendant would not testify. Over the weekend, investigations continued, and on June 5th, the preliminary autopsy report was released. The report concluded that Ana Rosa's cause of death was severe head trauma. On June 9th, it was discovered that luminol tests had been conducted at the home where Ana Rosa and Marcelo lived. The tests showed a large amount of blood had been cleaned up. The medical examiners also discovered new details during the autopsy, including knife cuts on the victim's extremities. A cut, 18 centimeters long and 7 centimeters deep, was found on the victim's neck, reaching the cervical region. Based on these findings, the prosecutor's office charged Marcelo with double aggravated murder. Almost 2 years after Ana Rosa's murder, Marcelo's trial began. The prosecution explained the seriousness of the charges to the jury. According to the autopsy results, Ana Rosa suffered a severe initial blow to the face, which left her unconscious, followed by multiple blows to the head that crushed her skull. At the first hearing, Marcelo decided to stay silent. The court then heard testimony from witnesses. Deborah Territorios, Ana Rosa's daughter, testified that after her mother met Marcelo, she became increasingly distant from her children and other family members. Deborah stated that she and her father moved to a different city, followed by her older siblings, which made it harder for them to communicate with their mother. However, when Deborah spent time alone with her mother, Ana Rosa was loving and caring. But whenever Marcelo was around, her mother would pull away. Deborah even had to leave her mother's house quickly on occasion because Marcelo was expected to arrive soon. Ana Rosa's cousin, Roberto Enrique Reina, also testified. He witnessed their argument on May 28, 2017, which started at his house. According to Roberto, the argument began when Marcelo saw a message on Ana Rosa's phone. The prosecutor's indictment highlights Marcelo's control over Ana Rosa, including a power imbalance in their relationship and objectifying her in front of others. Fernando, a co-worker and friend of the victim, Ana Rosa, explained that after she started dating Marcelo, she initially grew distant from everyone, but then she tried to reconnect. System. Fernando added that Marcelo seemed to imitate Ana Rosa's actions, even taking Reiki classes shortly after learning she was also taking. According to the indictment, Ana Rosa told a friend that after starting energy harmonization therapy, she felt better and was able to improve her relationships with family members. She also planned to visit her son in Bolivia. However, as Ana Rosa's life improved, Marcelo became increasingly aggressive. Fernando reported that Marcelo once lashed out when Ana Rosa said women with positive attitudes could achieve their goals, he calling women idiots who would end up dying in a ditch. On the second day of the hearing, Claudio Bustamante, the police officer who took Marcelo's statement, testified. He told the jury that Marcelo had spontaneously confessed during the interrogation without any pressure from him. According to Bustamante, Marcelo stated that Ana Rosa had told him on Monday that she was no longer satisfied with him and was cheating on him, which made Marcelo angry and prompted him to hit her, although he couldn't remember what he used to hit her. On April 11th, the 11th Criminal Court's jury delivered its verdict, finding Marcelo Favio fair guilty of the murder of Ana Rosa Barrera. The sentence was life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 35 years, conditional on good behavior. Upon hearing the verdict, Ana Rosa's relatives burst into tears and shouted at Marcelo, labeling him as a murderer and wishing him to spend the rest of his life in prison. The prosecutor in charge of the case stated that the jury's decision aligned with the prosecution's request. The evidence showed that Marcelo Favio Fair had acted with full awareness and premeditation in planning Ana Rosa's murder. According to the prosecution, Marcelo's attempt to appear mentally unstable at the time of the crime was a tactic to evade the maximum sentence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Marcos Matsunaga. Marcos Matsunaga was a member of one of Brazil's wealthiest families and headed Yoki, their business that produced a wide range of food products. Yoki was founded by Marcos's grandfather, Yoshizo Cadano, who had immigrated to Brazil. The company name, Yoki, was derived from the first letters of Yoshizo's surname and first name. Yoki's origins date back to the mid-20th century when it started as a small flour milling operation. Despite being formed during a time of crisis and war, the business not only survived but thrived, eventually expanding into a global company with a diverse product line. Born into a wealthy family, Marcos never experienced hardship or denial. As the successor to the family business, he inherited the company built by his grandfather and father. With this foundation, Marcos had the potential to become the family's first billionaire, a goal he pursued throughout his life. However, his ambitious plans were ultimately unfulfilled. Everyone who knew Marcos personally described him as a skilled and successful businessman. He not only preserved but also significantly increased the family's wealth, generating substantial profits. However, Marcos had a difficult personality. He was demanding, arrogant, and controlling, particularly with those around him. Additionally, he struggled with his physical appearance, having been overweight since childhood, wearing glasses due to vision problems, and being short and somewhat awkward. These issues led to difficulties in his interactions with peers from an early age. Marcos had few friends, and women tended to avoid him because of his unusual demeanor. For a long time, he was unable to form lasting, meaningful relationships. Despite his wealth and business success, he couldn't sustain romantic connections beyond a couple of dates. His arrogance and ego often repelled women, leading him to seek the company of escorts and sex workers. There is very little information available about his first wife. It is known that he married out of desperation and pressure from his relatives, rather than love or passion. Despite this, the marriage lasted several years, but both spouses quickly regretted their decision. The young wife initially tried to tolerate his difficult personality, hoping they could become a happy couple over time. However, she was mistaken, and they grew further apart over the years. Marcos frequently cheated on her without attempting to hide or justify it. He typically found mistresses on websites offering intimacy for money. One such mistress was Alice, an escort with a portfolio on these platforms. Marcos noticed her, a bright and attractive blonde with a beautiful figure, and began regularly inviting her on dates, generously paying for them. Alice was 6 years younger than him and was born into a poor and dysfunctional family in a high-crime area of the city. She never knew her father, and her mother struggled with heavy drinking and was often involved with men who shared her addiction. As a result, Alice had a difficult and joyless childhood, facing repeated physical and emotional abuse from her mother's roommates at a very young age. As soon as she finished school, Alice left her troubled home life and neighborhood behind. She took nursing courses, which led to a job at a hospice. However, she soon realized that caring for terminally ill patients was not fulfilling her dreams or utilizing her full potential. As a sensitive and vulnerable young woman, Alice became deeply attached to her patients, and each death felt like a personal loss. A few years later, Alice decided to pursue higher education and change careers. She chose to study law, which she believed would offer her more opportunities and open doors in life. After preparing for admission, Alice scored well on the entrance exams. However, her modest nursing salary was not enough to cover the cost of her studies. Alice was alone with no one to turn to, having cut ties with her family after leaving home. To support herself, she decided to monetize her physical appearance and signed up on an escort services website. With the site's help, she created an attractive profile, and soon, wealthy men took notice of the young and beautiful blonde. Through her escort work, Alice earned a good income, enough to cover her education expenses and support herself. However, she intended to quit this line of work once she graduated and found a job in her field. During this time, Alice met Marcos, a regular client who showered her with gifts and openly dated her. Although Alice knew Marcos was married, she never imagined that one of the country's wealthiest men would leave his wife for her. Alice Matsunaga's story resembled a Cinderella tale. A poor girl from a disadvantaged background, working as an escort, captures the heart of a multimillionaire who falls deeply in love with her. Marcos lost his mind over Alice, but it's unclear if she deliberately tried to win him over. 6 months into their relationship, Marcos decided he wanted to be with Alice long-term, so he filed for divorce from his first wife without hesitation. He began introducing Alice as his fiancée to everyone. To avoid revealing how they really met in Alice's occupation, Marcos and Alice fabricated a story about meeting casually in a cafe. They stuck to this version, and even Marcos's closest relatives and friends didn't suspect the truth. However, Alice wasn't warmly received by Marcos's family, the Matsunagas. His parents suspected that Alice had used her charm to capture Marcos's heart, despite his unattractive appearance, and was now pretending to overlook his difficult personality. Nevertheless, when Marcos announced his plans to divorce his first wife and marry Alice, no one strongly objected. Marcos organized an extravagant traditional wedding, complete with a white dress, numerous guests, and a large, multi-tiered cake. Following the wedding, he relocated his wife to his spacious and luxurious mansion, where she took on the role of mistress. Matsunaji was renowned for his passion for collecting expensive wines and rare firearms. His home featured a vast wine cellar, where bottles were meticulously arranged by year and country of origin. Additionally, the house had a secret room dedicated to his extensive collection of firearms and edged weapons, which adorned the walls from floor to ceiling. Marcos took great pride in his collections and continually sought to expand them. However, his home was also overflowing with antiques, luxury items, and modern art pieces, which were somewhat tastelessly displayed on the walls and every available surface. After the wedding, they decided to start a family, but despite their efforts, Alice struggled to conceive for an extended period. Consequently, they opted for in vitro fertilization, but success was not immediate. When their daughter was finally born, it seemed that their happiness knew no bounds. Marcos and Alice were devoted to raising their baby girl, planning for her future, and later, exploring the world together as a family, immersing themselves in diverse cultures and traditions. Their daughter was raised with love, care, and every luxury, like a true little princess. However, Marcos and his wife, Alice, shared a unique common interest: big game hunting. In reality, hunting had always been Marcos's passion. He had previously tried to share this hobby with other women in his life, including his first wife, but they had all found it repulsive. Marcos had given up hope of finding someone who shared his enthusiasm. Many people now believe that Alice took up hunting to gain Marcos's favor and win his heart. Initially, they visited shooting ranges together, where Alice learned to handle various firearms. Later, they ventured into the woods to hunt wild animals. Alice showed no qualms about taking the lives of animals, treating it as a competition: either you succeed or you don't. Marcos admired this attitude and enjoyed watching his wife skillfully handle her weapons and track her prey. He also taught Alice how to hunt and prepare wild game such as boars and deer. They would skin and carve the animals together, using specialized tools like large knives, cleavers, and axes to separate the body parts. The family didn't have traditional pets like cats or dogs. Instead, they kept poisonous snakes in specially designed terrariums that mimicked their natural habitats. This was a dream come true for Marcos, who had always been fascinated by snakes but had been discouraged from keeping them by his first wife. Alice had won Marcos over by embracing his unconventional hobbies. By the spring of 2012, Marcos was on the verge of making the deal of a lifetime, one that would catapult him to billionaire status and take his income to new heights. He was busy negotiating with potential business partners, planning to sell the family company and invest the profits in a lucrative new venture. Marcos was rarely at home due to his complete absorption in work and the realization of his ambitious plans. He and his wife resided in an elite apartment complex in the city's business center, near the main office of his company. However, Marcos spent most of his time away, leaving his young wife alone and bored in their luxurious apartment with a panoramic city view. Marcos' work schedule was tightly packed with meetings, business discussions, and specialist consultations, often keeping him away from home overnight. Despite this, he promised his wife that once the deal was finalized, their lives would undergo a significant transformation. But on May 19, 2012, the eve of a billion-dollar deal, Marcos vanished without a trace. His wife, Alice, did not report Marcos missing until the next day. She believed he was at work, attending a scheduled meeting that could have lasted into the night and early morning. Marcos was supposed to meet a business partner and had warned Alice that he might spend the night at the office before heading straight to the meeting. However, when Marcos failed to return home and stopped answering his phone, Alice grew concerned and filed the missing persons report. Police quickly discovered that Marcos had missed both the evening and morning meetings, which was unusual for him. This led them to suspect that Marcos might have been kidnapped, and they expected a ransom demand to be made to his family within hours. Despite this, 24 hours passed, followed by another 24 hours, without any ransom demands. As time went on, hopes of finding Marcos alive began to dwindle. Meanwhile, investigators questioned Marcos's relatives, friends, and business partners to see if he had any enemies or if anyone might benefit from his disappearance or the disruption of his upcoming deal. However, they were unable to identify anyone who might have wanted Marcos dead. Marcos was a skilled businessman who made strategic decisions that generally benefited everyone. However, his personal life was marred by infidelity. His wife, Alice, discovered that he was cheating on her with a woman named Natasha. Despite his promise to end the affair after Alice threatened to divorce him, Marcos continued to see Natasha, albeit more discreetly. Alice suspected that the affair was ongoing and hired a private detective to gather evidence. The detective uncovered photographs and videos of Marcos and Natasha on romantic dates at restaurants and venues that Marcos and Alice regularly visited. It seemed that Marcos was openly flaunting his infidelity, taking his mistress to places where he was well known and where his wife might find out. As it was later revealed, Natasha Lima, a businessman, was discovered on the same escort services website where he had first met Alice. They had been together for approximately 5 months, during which time he gifted her an expensive car and paid a substantial sum of money for Natasha to delete her profile from the site. Alice presented photos and videos as evidence of her husband's infidelity to Marcos's parents. She mentioned that she had shown all this to Marcos the day before his disappearance, but instead of apologizing and asking for forgiveness, he packed his belongings, informed his wife that he was leaving her, and then departed from their apartment, vanishing without a trace. Based on Alice's account, it seemed that her husband had given in to his desires and decided to run away with his new mistress. However, those who knew Matsunaga unanimously agreed that he was too invested in the business, which his family had built over decades, to simply abandon it and disappear. The answers to many questions were uncovered about a week later when a passerby discovered scattered garbage bags containing human remains in a deserted area roughly 50 kilometers from Marcos's residence. The man immediately notified the police of his gruesome discovery. The victim was soon identified as Marcus Matsunaga, a missing person who had been searched for nationwide. According to experts, Matsunaga was shot in the head and then dismembered. His body was packed into garbage bags and dumped on the outskirts of the city. The killer's skills with a carving knife suggested they were either a surgeon or an experienced butcher. This conclusion was drawn from the precise cuts made to separate the body parts. The investigation initially lacked concrete leads, so it began by reviewing the last known location of the deceased. The elite residential complex where Matsunaga lived with his wife and daughter had multiple surveillance cameras, and their footage was carefully examined. The evening before Matsunaga went missing, he and his wife ordered food to be delivered to their home. Security footage shows Matsunaga taking the elevator to the first floor, then returning to his apartment with pizza boxes in hand. He entered the apartment and never left again, not that evening, overnight, or the next day. Despite this, his wife was seen leaving the apartment the following morning with 3 large, wheeled suitcases. The footage shows Alice struggling to move heavy suitcases, which sparked the investigators' suspicions about their contents. On the same day, she was taken into custody and questioned at the police station. Initially, she denied any wrongdoing, sticking to her story that her husband had left her for another woman. However, when shown the elevator footage, she broke down in tears and began to open up. Alice revealed that her marriage had been troubled for a long time, and her husband's behavior had become increasingly abusive. He constantly belittled her, bringing up her past work as an escort and claiming he had rescued her. He also controlled every aspect of her life, isolating her from friends and criticizing her parenting. When Alice mentioned divorce, Marcos threatened to leave her with nothing, take their daughter, and restrict her access to the child. On the evening of the incident, Alice confronted her husband with photos of him and his mistress, which only enraged him. He physically abused her, and Alice's memories of what happened next are hazy. She doesn't recall how she obtained the gun used to shoot her husband. Later, realizing what she had done, Alice attempted to cover up the crime by disposing of the body and making it seem like her husband had vanished. Alice, a former nurse familiar with human anatomy, had been taught by her husband how to dissect animal carcasses. They had the necessary tools at home, making the process of cutting up her husband's body a matter of technique. This gruesome task was carried out while their young daughter slept in the next room. However, Alice's testimony raised many doubts and questions from the start. Further investigation revealed that Alice received photos and videos of her husband's infidelity from a private detective on May 20th, after she had already killed him. She presented these to her husband's parents, claiming he had abandoned her for his mistress. A witness, Natasha Lima, testified in court that Marcos wanted a divorce but was afraid of Alice, describing her as mentally unstable and capable of terrible things. Natasha stated that the last time she saw Marcos, he complained about the constant family scandals and shared his plans to move to Florida after selling his company. He intended to start a new business and leave Alice behind, as he planned to divorce her and move on with his life. Experts made a disturbing discovery. There was blood in Marcos's lungs, indicating he was still alive and trying to breathe when his head was severed from his body. This contradicts Alice's claim that he died instantly from a bullet wound. Furthermore, the pathologist found that the bullet entered Marcos's head at an unusual angle, suggesting he was not expecting to be shot and made no attempt to defend himself. This finding contradicts Alice's account of Marcos attacking her and her need to defend herself. Most witnesses testified that Marcos, despite his difficult personality and hurtful words, never physically harmed anyone. It appears that Alice fabricated the episode, taking advantage of Marcos's inability to refute her claims. Ultimately, the court found Alice guilty of premeditated murder with extreme cruelty and attempting to cover up the crime. Alice Matsuniga received a 20-year prison sentence, a punishment many deemed too lenient for her crime. The victim's parents are now tasked with raising their granddaughter. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Chris Coleman. Chris Coleman, a former Marine, met his wife Sherry, an Air Force member, while serving in the military. Sherry instantly fell in love with Chris and knew he was the one. They got married before their first child, Garrett, was born, as they were devout Christians. After Garrett's birth, they had their second son, Gavin. Gavin was more energetic and mischievous, unlike his laid-back father and brother. Chris and Sherry were devoted parents who cherished their children. Sherry protected them fiercely, while Chris enjoyed every moment with them. When Chris left the military, the family moved to Waterloo, Illinois, where Chris worked as the head of security for TV evangelist Joyce Meyer. Joyce's luxurious lifestyle sparked controversy, with critics accusing her of exploiting her followers' fears. Chris's job was to protect Joyce from threatening letters and hate mail. He worked as her bodyguard and earned a substantial salary, providing financial security for his family. However, his frequent travels with Joyce put a strain on his family, as he was away from home for long periods. His sons deeply missed him, and his wife Sherry felt overwhelmed, underappreciated, and burdened with household responsibilities. In October 2008, Chris went to Florida, where his wife grew up, and met with an old friend, Tara Lintz, who gave him a tour of the city. Days later, Chris received a disturbing email from an address called Destroy Chris, warning him that he and his family would be in danger if he continued to work for Joyce Meyer. The ministry received more threatening emails, specifying a time and date for the potential attack on Chris's family. The emails seemed to have inside information on Chris's schedule, including his upcoming trip abroad. Chris told Sherry about the threatening emails he had been receiving, and on the following Monday, he reported them to the local police. As Chris often worked away from home with Joyce Meyer Ministries, the police offered to increase patrols around their house during his absences. But this did little to alleviate Sherry's fear for her family's safety. Sherry's concern was so great that she once asked a friend to stay with her while Chris was away, as she didn't feel comfortable being alone in the house. She emphasized that she would do whatever it took to keep her family safe. 2 months into the threats, the Colemans received a disturbing, hand-delivered letter demanding that Chris publicly renounce his faith or face severe consequences. The letter's ominous tone left Sherry genuinely fearful for her family's safety. The threat had a profound impact on Sherry, and her fear grew daily. To respond to the threat, Chris and Sherry took extra precautions to protect their family, including installing surveillance cameras around their home, which captured footage of the surrounding area and sent it to a screen in their basement office. Chris hoped the cameras would help identify the person behind the threats. After the cameras were installed, the threats suddenly stopped and life returned to normal for the family. For a few months, everything seemed fine. However, in April 2009, the family received another disturbing letter warning that Sherry's worst fears were about to come true. Chris was deeply disturbed by the letter's ominous tone. After reviewing the security footage, Chris was shocked to see a mysterious silhouette. Although the figure's identity remained unknown, its presence reignited Chris's concerns for his family's safety. The renewed sense of fear led to increased police efforts to protect the Coleman family. Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow from the Columbia Police Department took a particular interest in the case and offered to help the family. He set up video cameras to monitor the Coleman's driveway, but unfortunately, they did not catch the person behind the threats. On May 5, 2009, Chris went to the gym and then called his home phone to check on Sherry and the boys, making sure they were up and getting ready for school. Chris called for help, but no one responded. Concerned, he phoned his neighbor, Detective Justin Barlow, at 6:45 a.m. Chris told Barlow that he had left for the gym in St. Louis County around 5:30 a.m. and had been trying to reach his wife Sherry, but she wasn't answering her phone. Worried, Chris asked Barlow to check on Sherry and their sons. Barlow grabbed his gear, including his weapon, handcuffs, flashlight, and radio, and headed to the Coleman house. As he waited for backup to arrive, his priority was to make contact with Sherry and ensure everyone's safety. With a mix of hope and unease, Barlow approached the door and knocked firmly, hoping someone would respond. When Detective Justin Barlow arrived at the Coleman home, the eerie silence and darkness made him feel uneasy. The lack of movement and lights inside the house heightened his sense of unease. Minutes later, a patrol vehicle arrived with another officer to assist him. The second officer went to the back of the house to try to see or communicate with Sherry or the boys through a window or door. Instead, he found signs of forced entry into the basement, which immediately grabbed Detective Barlow's attention. He became deeply concerned for Sherry Garrett and Gavin's safety. Detective Barlow and the second officer decided to enter the house through the basement, announcing their presence as they went. But they received no response. During their thorough search of the basement, they found a disconnected video cable at the computer desk. This discovery led them to believe that the camera's digital video recorder was missing. Detective Justin Barlow and the second officer searched the Coleman home from the basement up, noticing a strong smell of aerosol spray paint that grew stronger as they climbed the stairs. On the main level, they found the walls painted with derogatory messages targeting Chris, Sherry, and their sons. 13 minutes after Chris called the detective, Chris returned home from the gym and was told to wait outside while the officers searched the house. He complied, sitting quietly on the porch without asking questions or trying to enter. Meanwhile, a third officer arrived, and the three of them searched the rest of the house for Sherry and the boys. On the upper floors, they found more hate-filled spray-painted messages. When they reached the second story, Detective Barlow entered the bedroom of Garrett, the oldest son, where he appeared to be asleep. However, upon closer inspection, the detective realized that Garrett was dead, with no signs of life and a cold body. Ligature marks around his neck indicated that he had been murdered. Detectives' minds were shocked when they found Garrett's lifeless body. Next door, the second officer entered to check on Gavin and was horrified to discover the boy was also dead, strangled with ligature marks around his neck, just like his brother. The gruesome scene was made even more disturbing by an obscene message spray-painted on the bedsheets. In the master bedroom, the third officer found Sherry's lifeless body on the bed, her hair covering her face. It was clear she had been murdered. As the officer examined the room, he noticed Sherry's body had several bruises, indicating she had fought back and tried to defend herself and her sons. After discovering the bodies of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin, detectives, including Justin Barlow, heard Chris enter the house, having waited outside for news about his family. Detective Barlow took Chris outside to give him some privacy to process the news. However, as the reality of the situation sank in, Chris's reaction was intense. He felt sick, collapsed, and curled up into a fetal position, unable to contain his emotions. The shock of the brutal murders was too much for him to comprehend. Chris was in disbelief that his family had been taken away in such a violent manner. In desperation, he tried to reach out to his father, Ronald, telling him that something had happened to Sherry and the boys. Ronald immediately realized that Chris was in shock upon receiving the news. Ronald was stunned by the tragedy that had befallen his family. The shocking news of the murders of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin spread quickly throughout the community of Waterloo, Illinois, where the Coleman family lived. As the neighbors learned of the tragedy, they were left devastated and terrified. Chris expressed remorse for leaving his family alone to go to the gym, but when asked if he had any idea who might have committed the crime, he claimed to have no clue. Nevertheless, Detective Barlow noticed several suspicious behaviors during the interview. One red flag was Chris's lack of curiosity about the details of his family's murder, which seemed unusual given the gravity of the situation. The detective noticed Chris trying to hide scratches on his arms during the interview, even using a blanket to conceal them despite the warm temperature. The scratches were suspicious because they suggested Chris had been in a physical struggle, similar to Sherry's fight with her killer. When asked about the scratches, Chris claimed they came from installing a satellite dish the day before. He denied having an affair during the police interview, but did admit to a close friendship with Tara, a cocktail waitress and high school friend of his wife's who lived in Florida. Chris said his conversations with Tara were innocent, but wouldn't have been approved by his wife. He insisted he would never consider leaving his family for Tara. However, when detectives contacted Tara, her story contradicted Chris's. She revealed that they had been having an affair since November 2008. Tara provided evidence from her phone and laptop, including emails, explicit pictures, and videos that exposed the true nature of their relationship. When detectives confronted Chris with the information Tara had provided, he admitted to seeing her more frequently than he initially told them. Further investigation revealed that Chris and Tara had a secret arrangement to meet at locations where Chris worked for Joyce Meyer. They would sneak away together, often to exotic destinations like Hawaii, to spend time together without their family's knowledge. Although Chris claimed that his relationship with Tara was not an affair, detectives found evidence on Tara's phone and computer that suggested otherwise. Tara had marked a wedding to Chris on her calendar, as well as planned vacations with him, indicating that she believed Chris intended to leave his family for her. The detectives were suspicious of Chris because the evidence contradicted his claim that his relationship with Tara was casual. Chris's father, Ronald, was shocked to learn about the affair, but he firmly believed that it was unrelated to the murders of Chris's wife and son. According to Ronald, Chris was a gentle person who was not capable of such brutal crimes. Ronald described Chris as a quiet individual who showed no signs of violence. However, the detectives thought that Chris's affair with Tara was a strong motive for the murders. Despite this, their initial investigation did not find enough evidence to charge Chris with the crime. After being questioned for 6 hours, Chris was released without being charged. Tara became a person of interest in the investigation, but she was eventually cleared as a suspect when it was discovered that she was in Florida on the morning of May 5, 2009, when the murders occurred. The Coleman family murders led to one of the largest murder investigations in Illinois history. A special team of 25 detectives was formed to catch the person who killed the Coleman family. They worked extremely long hours, often 20 hours a day, for 15 days straight, calling in experts to help with the case. One of their main goals was to find out who sent the hateful emails to Chris Coleman. They carefully looked at every threatening email sent to Joyce Meyer Ministries over the past year, which led them to investigate leads all over the country. The team tracked down and talked to every person who sent threatening emails, but none of them seemed to be responsible for the murder. A team of computer experts was then brought in to help investigate the crime. The detectives hoped they could find some digital evidence related to the murder. The computer experts started by looking at the email account Diaris. They found that the email address was created on November 14, 2008, just a few days before the first threatening email was sent. One surprising thing they discovered was that the death threats sent to Chris Coleman's family came from Chris's own computer IP address. The detectives thoroughly examined the spray-painted messages at the crime scene and compared them to Christopher Coleman's handwriting to gather evidence. They took photos of the messages and collected handwriting samples from Coleman, which were then sent to a specialist for analysis. The experts' comparison of the two samples revealed a match, indicating that Christopher Coleman had written the messages on his home's walls on the day of the murders. Further analysis identified the specific brand and color of spray paint used, Rust-Oleum Candy Apple Red. After learning that Chris Coleman had bought something from a hardware store just days before his family's murder, a detective contacted the store's manager. The manager confirmed the purchase and revealed that Chris had bought Rust-Oleum Candy Apple Red spray paint, the same type found at the crime scene. This discovery was crucial because it established a link between Chris and the murder. The timeline of the murder was also important. Chris initially claimed to have left his house around 5:45 a.m. on May 5, 2009, but the medical examiner determined that the murders occurred around 3 a.m., which meant Chris was at home when his family was killed. 2 weeks after the bodies were found, Chris Coleman was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecution argued that Chris's motivations were greed, selfishness, and narcissism, and that he wanted a fresh start, but his family was standing in the way. In April 2011, Chris Coleman stood trial for the murders of his wife, Sherry, and their 2 sons, Garrett and Gavin. The prosecution argued that Chris killed his family to be with another woman, Tara, as he would lose his well-paying job with Joyce Meyer Ministries if he divorced Sherry, since the organization does not condone divorce. Chris's defense attorney claimed that an intruder entered the Coleman's home on May 5, 2009, and committed the murders. However, 2 years later, on the anniversary of the murders, Chris was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole, despite being eligible for a death sentence. The judge's decision was influenced by the recent repeal of the death penalty in Illinois, which would take effect a few months later. Sherry's loved ones wanted to keep her, Garrett, and Gavin's memory alive and decided to raise funds for victims of domestic violence, a cause close to their hearts. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Elizabeth Smart. On June 5, 2002, 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart was sleeping in her bedroom in Federal Heights, Salt Lake City, Utah. She shared the room with her sister Mary Catherine, but their peaceful night was about to take a terrifying turn. A soft-spoken man, armed with a knife, climbed through their open window. This woke Mary Catherine, who pretended to be asleep, hoping to protect her sister. The man ordered Elizabeth to be quiet, threatening to harm her if she didn't comply. Terrified, Elizabeth put on her shoes and was taken outside. Mary Catherine waited 2 hours before waking their parents, Ed and Lois Smart. She told them someone had taken Elizabeth, but they didn't believe her at first, thinking she might be dreaming. However, after inspecting the bedroom and finding a cut window screen, they realized Mary Catherine was telling the truth. They immediately contacted the authorities, who arrived and questioned Mary Catherine about the kidnapper. Mary Catherine described the man as having dark hair on his head, arms, and hands. Although he spoke quietly, she recognized his voice as familiar, but couldn't remember where she had heard it before. The police used the Rachel alert system to broadcast information about Elizabeth's abduction to the public, seeking their help in finding her. As part of their investigation, the police looked into people who had toured the Smart family's home, which was for sale at the time. They also searched the family's computer to see if Elizabeth had interacted with anyone suspicious online. The day after the kidnapping, Ed and Lois Smart made a heartfelt appeal on national television, pleading for their daughter's safe return. The police searched all night for the suspicious individual, but couldn't find them, so they ruled out the tip as not credible. Another tip came from a milkman who claimed to have seen a man driving a grey Honda or Nissan on Elizabeth Street around the time of her disappearance. He wrote down the license plate number, but when the police checked, they couldn't find any information on it, so they dismissed the tip. The police investigation was complicated by the many people who showed up at the Smart residence soon after Elizabeth's abduction, which could have contaminated any potential evidence. They questioned a man who had contact with Elizabeth before her abduction, but he was released after they determined he wasn't involved. The search for Elizabeth continued, with over 20 volunteer pilots searching the Salt Lake area from the air, but they found nothing. Tracking dogs indicated they had smelled something in Red Butte Canyon, but the police search of that area yielded nothing. Elizabeth's father, Ed, was exhausted from the search and was hospitalized briefly, but he was determined to keep looking for his daughter. He and his wife, Lois, were barely holding on. But they believed Elizabeth was alive and would come home to them. Ed took a polygraph test to aid the investigation, and the police ruled out the possibility that Elizabeth had staged her disappearance or run away. Mark Claus, whose daughter was kidnapped and murdered, reached out to the Smart family to offer support and share his own experiences. He noted that the internet had helped spread the word about Elizabeth's disappearance, which increased the chances of finding her. The police received information about a man named Brett Michael Edmonds, who was seen in the area around the time of Elizabeth's abduction. They searched for him, but he had relocated to New Mexico and Texas. After a chase, they arrested a man they thought was Brett, but it turned out to be the wrong person. The police investigated a man who resembled a suspect in Elizabeth's case, but they determined he was not involved. Meanwhile, they found Brett Michael Edmonds in West Virginia, where he was hospitalized due to an overdose and liver failure. Despite his critical condition, Brett was conscious and able to speak, allowing the police to question him about Elizabeth's abduction. After interviewing him, the police cleared Brett as a suspect. The police then shifted their attention to Richard Albert Ritchie, a 48-year-old man who had worked at Ed Smart's home for 2 months the previous year. Ed Smart had hired Richard and even gave him a 1990 Jeep Cherokee in exchange for his labor, unaware that Richard had a long history of criminal offenses, including burglary, robbery, and attempted murder. Richard Ritchie denied any involvement in Elizabeth's abduction and claimed to have cooperated fully with the police, providing DNA samples and sitting through 26 hours of interviews. Despite an exhaustive search of his home, the police found no evidence linking him to the abduction. As the search for Elizabeth continued, the Smart family received a promising lead when a witness reported seeing a girl matching Elizabeth's description in Nebraska. However, after investigating the report, the police found no connection to Elizabeth's case. The Smart family remained hopeful but cautious, determined to find their daughter while acknowledging the possibility of false leads. They kept an open mind, knowing that every lead, no matter how promising, had to be thoroughly investigated before they could finally be reunited with Elizabeth. Richard Ritchie was accused of burglary, a second-degree felony, and theft, a Class A misdemeanor, for stealing items from a house in Federal Heights on April 4, 2001. He was also charged with theft, a third-degree felony, for stealing jewelry and a perfume bottle worth $3,500 from the Smart house on June 6, 2001. However, these stolen items were not related to the investigation into Elizabeth Smart's kidnapping. Salt Lake District Attorney David Yoakum announced the charges in a press conference. When Ed Smart confronted Richard Ritchie about the Smart house theft, Ritchie denied it and was subsequently fired. Unfortunately, the police investigation into Elizabeth's abduction suffered a setback in August 2002 when Richard Ritchie, their prime suspect, died from a brainstem injury that caused hemorrhaging. As Ritchie's condition worsened, he lost the ability to communicate or breathe on his own. His family eventually decided to remove him from life support to prevent further suffering. Although Ritchie's death presented a significant challenge to the investigation, the authorities continued their efforts to find Elizabeth Smart's abductor. The investigation into Elizabeth Smart's kidnapping was hindered when the prime suspect was ruled out, causing doubts about the viability of other leads. Around the same time, in August 2002, an 11-year-old girl was brutally attacked and sexually assaulted in her own bedroom. The severity of her injuries was shocking, with every bone in the middle of her face broken. She required surgery, but remained in critical condition. The police arrested a close friend of her father, Javier Sickler, and charged him with burglary, assault, and attempted murder. Sickler claimed to have knocked on the front door of the victim's home, but said he blacked out afterward. Despite initial similarities with Elizabeth Smart's abduction, the police investigated and determined that Javier Sickler was not involved in her kidnapping. As the months passed with no sign of Elizabeth Smart, the police investigating her abduction turned to unorthodox methods to find her. One approach involved consulting psychics who claimed to possess extrasensory perception that could provide clues about her whereabouts. The psychics told investigators that Elizabeth might be found in a crypt in the foothills above Salt Lake City. This lead prompted a Seattle-based company to come forward, stating that over a dozen of its members had pinpointed Elizabeth's body using a specialized psychic technique called technical remote viewing. According to the group, their psychic abilities revealed that Elizabeth had been killed shortly after her abduction. However, when officers searched the specified tomb, they found no evidence of Elizabeth's disappearance. In November 2002, Walter Kenneth Holloway was arrested after falsely claiming to be the kidnapper of Elizabeth Smart. He contacted the Smart family and the Salt Lake Police Department, demanding a $3 million ransom from Ed and Lois Smart in exchange for their daughter's safe return. Holloway threatened to harm Elizabeth if his demands weren't met. However, the police quickly discovered that Holloway was not involved in the abduction and was simply trying to extort money from the Smart family. They tracked him down to South Carolina and cleared him of any involvement in the case. Ed Smart was outraged by the extortion scheme, feeling that it wasted valuable police resources and distracted them from finding his daughter. In October 2002, Mary Catherine, Elizabeth's sister, had a sudden realization. The voice of her sister's abductor sounded like Emmanuel, a man the family had briefly hired to do some yard work and roofing a year earlier. However, the police had doubts about this lead because Emmanuel had only worked for the family for a short time. A lot of time had passed since the abduction, and Mary Catherine had only heard the abductor's voice briefly. Despite their skepticism, the family worked with a sketch artist to draw a picture of Emmanuel based on their descriptions. The sketch was finally released in February 2003 and was featured on several TV shows, including Larry King Live and America's Most Wanted. A relative of a man named Brian David Mitchell recognized the sketch and contacted the police, providing them with recent photos of him. These photographs enabled authorities to confirm that the sketch was an accurate representation of Brian David Mitchell. On March 12, 2003, two couples in Sandy, Utah spotted Brian David Mitchell with a woman and a girl. Recognizing him from news photos as Elizabeth Smart's abductor, they immediately called the police. Brian David Mitchell was accompanied by his wife, Wanda Barzee, when he was found with Elizabeth Smart. The police were quickly alerted and sent to the scene, where they safely rescued Elizabeth Smart and took Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee into custody. After her rescue, Elizabeth's testimony revealed a disturbing account of her 9-month ordeal. She described being taken to a hidden encampment outside Salt Lake City, where she met Wanda Barzee, who played a significant role in her captivity. The camp was a makeshift shelter surrounded by dense foliage, carefully camouflaged to avoid detection. Elizabeth Smart described Wanda Barzee as initially caring and nurturing, offering comfort and warmth. However, as time passed, Barzee's behavior changed, and she began to exert control over Elizabeth. She forced Elizabeth to follow their unusual religious beliefs, insisting that she pray, read scriptures, and participate in religious rituals. One of the most distressing experiences Elizabeth endured during her captivity was being forced to marry Brian David Mitchell. Barzee threatened Elizabeth with physical harm if she refused to comply. The wedding ceremony, which Mitchell claimed was a symbol of eternal love, was actually a sham with no legal basis. It solely served as a means for Mitchell to assert his dominance over Elizabeth. After being forced into a marriage, Brian David Mitchell assaulted Elizabeth. He justified his actions by claiming to be a king, ordained to kidnap virgin brides to fight against the Antichrist. Mitchell believed Elizabeth was the first of many virgins he would abduct, and that she would join him in this fictional battle. During her captivity, Elizabeth suffered unimaginable abuse to prevent her escape. She was chained to a tree with a metal cable, restricting her movement outside her tent. This constant confinement made her feel trapped and helpless, unable to seek freedom. In addition to physical restraint, Elizabeth was also subjected to psychological manipulation. She was forced to take on a new identity, choosing the name Esther after the biblical figure. This name change symbolized the loss of her own identity and the control exerted over her by Mitchell and his accomplice, Wanda Barzee. Elizabeth suffered severe trauma during her captivity, particularly due to the frequent and repeated sexual assaults by Brian David Mitchell, which occurred multiple times a day. This abuse left her deeply traumatized and fearful. In addition to the sexual abuse, Elizabeth was forced to look at explicit materials, which further worsened her trauma and feelings of degradation. Moreover, she lived in constant fear of violence and death, as Brian David Mitchell regularly threatened to kill her. This perpetual state of fear and uncertainty amplified the abuse she endured, leaving her feeling utterly overwhelmed and powerless. To gain more control over Elizabeth, Mitchell would often force her to consume alcohol and drugs. He used these substances to reduce her ability to resist him and make her more vulnerable to his control. As a result, Elizabeth was frequently disoriented and helpless, making it easier for her abusers to commit their atrocious acts. After a lengthy legal process, Wanda Barzee admitted to her role in Elizabeth's kidnapping and was sentenced to 15 years in both state and federal prison, with the sentences to be served concurrently. In 2016, her federal sentence was terminated, and she was transferred from a Texas prison to a Utah prison to begin serving her state sentence. When Wanda Barzee was set to be released in September 2018, Elizabeth Smart, who had become a child safety advocate, strongly objected to her release. Elizabeth believed that Barzee still posed a threat to others, as she had never shown remorse for her actions or any signs of rehabilitation. Despite Elizabeth's protests, Wanda Barzee was released from prison. Elizabeth Smart's protest attracted extensive media attention and brought to light the ongoing concerns about the release of convicted criminals from prison. After a lengthy legal battle, Brian David Mitchell was finally sentenced to life in prison for kidnapping Elizabeth. At his sentencing hearing, Elizabeth took the opportunity to confront her kidnapper directly, delivering a powerful and emotional statement. In her statement, Elizabeth described the immense pain and trauma Mitchell had inflicted upon her, explaining that the 9 months she spent in captivity had stolen a part of her life that she could never recover. Despite this horrific experience, Elizabeth demonstrated remarkable resilience and determination, assuring Mitchell that she would go on to live a good life, unperturbed by the darkness he had brought into her world. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jamie Melgar. Sandra Melgar often lies in her small prison cell, reflecting on the unexpected turns her life has taken. She never imagined she'd become a widow and a suspect in her husband's murder. A year and a half after his tragic death, a grand jury indicted her, and nearly 5 years later, a jury convicted her based solely on circumstantial evidence. There was no clear motive or physical proof linking her to the crime. Since her husband's passing, every day has been a living nightmare for Sandra, now 59. Sometimes, she still expects to go back home and catches herself wanting to share things with him, only to remember he's gone. In a recent interview, Sandra's blue eyes were red and puffy from crying. She said with tears streaming down her pale cheeks that it didn't feel like he was really gone, and that it was like he was just away on a trip. She paused, then continued that she tried not to dwell on it, and knew she would see him again. For the past 10 months, Sandra had been imprisoned at the William P. Hobby Unit, a women's prison in the Texas countryside. Sandra maintains contact with her friends and family, many of whom still believe she is innocent. Despite the difficulties of communicating in a noisy prison environment and her soft voice, she regularly talks to her daughter, Elizabeth Liz Melgar Rose. Sandra also writes letters to her friends, who keep her updated about her Pomeranian, Lola, who was at home on the night of the incident. Thanks to the efforts of one of her closest friends, Sandra gets to spend a couple of hours with a rotating group of friends and family every weekend. Her daughter Liz is her biggest supporter, acting as her spokesperson and passionately arguing that her mother's imprisonment is a grave injustice that has deprived her of both parents. Liz mentioned that she had never seen her mother so broken and devastated, and that she had never been able to recover from that. Sandra's husband Jamie met a tragic end on December 23, 2012. Sandra has no memory of that night, which has raised suspicions among investigators. However, she maintains her innocence, insisting she did not commit the crime. As Sandra sits in her prison cell, her thoughts often go back to the evening of their 32nd wedding anniversary, on December 23, 2012. That night, she and Jamie had celebrated together. Later, she was awoken by their barking dogs to find herself bound and gagged on the closet floor, her head throbbing and her body aching. Sandra tried to stretch her legs and peek through the gap under the closet door, but her bindings and 2 hip replacements limited her movement. Even if she could free herself, a chair blocked the door handle, preventing her escape. In the same closet, she would later discover her husband Jamie, lying lifeless with 31 stab wounds to his hands and chest. The white walls were now stained with blood, and a grey telephone cord was used to bind Jamie's feet. A medical examiner later determined that all of Jamie's injuries were defensive wounds, indicating that he had fought back against his attacker instead of trying to escape. One particularly vicious blow had nearly severed his right thumb, which likely contributed to the extensive blood splatters found in the closet and bedroom. The bedroom was in disarray, with dresser drawers open, and clothes, books, and pill bottles scattered all over the floor. Sandra's purse and wallet had been rummaged through, and their contents were strewn across the blood-stained white comforter on the bed. A small white medical stool at the foot of the bed had blood stains on it, suggesting that it had been used as a makeshift surface for a knife during the attack. Nearby, a wooden chair had blood dripping down its back. The jacuzzi bathtub, where Sandra and Jamie had celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary just the night before, told a tragic story. A blood-stained white blouse, a green towel, and a silver chef knife with a 6-inch blade covered in blood droplets in every crevice were found in the bathtub, revealing the chilling details of the events that had unfolded. Police identified a knife as the murder weapon, a stark contrast to the joyful evening that had preceded it. Earlier that night, Sandra and Jamie had celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary with dinner at their favorite Mexican restaurant, planning to continue the celebration in their jacuzzi with candles, cocktails, strawberries, and whipped cream. After more than 3 decades together, Jaime and Sandra remained deeply in love, as Sandra would later tell the authorities. They had met in their senior year at Lamar High School, where Jamie was immediately smitten with the 17-year-old Sandra, who had blue eyes and blonde hair. Sandra was drawn to his sense of humor, intelligence, and kind nature, while Jamie admired her intelligence, down-to-earth personality, and humility. Before long, they became extremely close, and 2 years after graduating from high school, they got married in a simple ceremony at a courthouse in downtown Houston. On their anniversary, Sandra and Jamie relaxed in their jacuzzi, reflecting on their past and future. They dreamed of traveling, visiting the Grand Canyon, Ireland, and seeing the Northern Lights. With Jamie's retirement from the Houston Independent School District approaching, they envisioned a beachfront property to settle down after their adventures. Sandra and her husband Jamie spent a romantic evening together, giving each other massages and relaxing in the jacuzzi. However, their peaceful night was interrupted by their dogs barking. Jamie got out of the bathroom to take care of the dogs, and that was the last time Sandra saw him alive. Meanwhile, Jamie's brother Herman was waiting outside the house, wondering why no one was answering the door. Herman and his family had been invited over for dinner, but Jamie and Sandra weren't responding to calls or the doorbell. Herman found it strange, especially since Jamie's truck was still in the driveway and Sandra's car was parked in the open garage. Herman told his family to wait by the front door while he went to the backyard to take a look. He noticed a plastic tarp hanging from the pergola on the back porch, which was evidence of Jamie's recent DIY project. Herman then went back to the front yard and decided to check the laundry room door inside the garage. If it was locked, he thought they would leave, but to his surprise, the door was unlocked. He entered the house, finding it dimly lit, gray and stuffy, with all the blinds closed. As he opened the front door, the dogs started barking and jumping around, creating an unsettling atmosphere. That was when they heard muffled screams. Herman rushed to the back of the house and found a large chair blocking the closet door in the bathroom. Inside, he found Sandra lying on the floor in a black satin nightgown, screaming for help. Herman and his wife Maria worked to free Sandra from the tight restraints that bound her arms and legs. To help, Herman got a pair of scissors from the bathroom. Meanwhile, Sandra repeatedly asked, "Where's Jamie?" She had visible bruises on her arms, including a dark one on her left bicep. After Herman and Maria finally freed her, Sandra rushed into the bedroom and found Jamie's lifeless body hidden in the closet, his feet sticking out. Despite it being clear that he was dead, given his cold, pale, and naked body, she still checked for a pulse. Sandra put a blue jacket on her injured husband Jamie, and with Maria's help, got him back to the bathroom. When the paramedics arrived, Sandra was extremely distraught, making it hard for her to talk to the first paramedic, Stephanie Roberts. According to Roberts' report, Sandra was in shock, crying periodically, and had lost track of time. Her last clear memory was around 1 a.m., and she was unaware that 15 hours had passed. The police noticed bruises on Sandra's hands and arms, as well as a small scratch on her left thumb, but no visible blood. Sandra told the police that after Jamie let the dogs in, she got out of the bathtub and went to her closet to get dressed. Then, she claimed to have no memory until she woke up in the closet at an unknown time, eventually screaming for help, but possibly falling back asleep due to a seizure. Sandra had several serious medical conditions, including lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and grand mal seizures, which had forced her to resign from her job as a licensed vocational nurse. In the weeks leading up to Jamie's murder, Sandra experienced warning signs of an impending seizure, known as auras. After a seizure, she would sleep for hours, then wake up feeling disoriented, confused, and in pain. During the investigation, Sandra was questioned by Sheriff Sergeants Shah Kazal and James Duay at the Harris County Sheriff's Office. Sandra felt uncomfortable in the cold interrogation room and asked to take a polygraph test, despite feeling cold and shaky. The 3-hour interrogation focused on the 36 hours leading up to Jamie's death. Sandra spoke softly and complained of having a headache. She recalled specific details about her activities, such as removing her boots in the bedroom and their conversation in the jacuzzi. However, she struggled to remember other details, and her memory was unclear. Sandra initially said Jamie had left her alone for 15 minutes to let the dogs in before she got out of the jacuzzi. Later, she thought it might have been around 5 minutes. She admitted to being bad at keeping track of time and was just making guesses about the timeline. When asked about their future plans, Sandra became overwhelmed and burst into tears. Kazal suggested that Sandra might have been involved in Jamie's death, which prompted Sandra to ask for a lawyer, saying she wasn't going to answer any more questions because she felt confused. Duay asked Sandra if she would take a polygraph test, but she refused, citing concerns about her nervousness, physical symptoms, and the potential for the results to be used against her. She wanted to consult with a lawyer first. Duay seemed frustrated by her refusal, implying that it suggested she had something to hide. He warned Sandra that the investigation would be thorough and that they would gather information about her, her husband, and their relationships with neighbors and family members. Sandra hoped the investigation would focus on someone else, insisting she wasn't involved in Jamie's murder. When asked about her relationship with her husband, she described it as great, even better lately. As the interrogation neared its end, the detectives grew frustrated with Sandra's claims of having no memory of the events. They pressed her, wondering how she could have been unaware of her husband being brutally stabbed in the bedroom just a few feet away, and why she hadn't heard his screams. Detective Kazal implored her to help, but Sandra repeatedly denied having heard anything, covering her face with her hands. Kazal and Duay left the cold, confined room, leaving Sandra crying with her face in her hands. Later, Kazal contacted the Harris County District Attorney's Office to file murder charges against Sandra. However, the DA's office ultimately decided not to pursue those charges due to a lack of evidence. 2 days after the murder, Liz met with Kazal and Duay, telling them that various items were missing from the house, including a TV and medication. She also shared information about her mother's health issues and seizures. Unfortunately, this meeting didn't lead to any significant breakthroughs in the case. Liz continued to call the authorities, asking about the progress of the investigation, but eventually, they stopped responding to her calls. A year and a half later, Sandra was quietly indicted for Jamie's murder by a grand jury. However, the grand jury proceedings were kept secret, leaving the public unaware of the discussions and evidence presented. Sandra's case moved slowly, passing from one prosecutor to another over the next 3 years. Finally, it landed on Colleen Barnett's desk in May 2017. Barnett was a seasoned prosecutor, with a reputation for being diligent and fair. Despite the challenges in the case, including no apparent motive, no confession, and no direct evidence linking Sandra to the crime, Barnett believed in the case. During the 13-day trial, Barnett portrayed Sandra as a calculating murderer who had planned Jamie's death. She claimed that Sandra had tied Jamie's feet with a grey telephone cord and then stabbed him with a knife. Barnett also highlighted the presence of a bag of sex toys found on the bed, which Sandra later claimed was a gag gift from a friend. Although Barnett couldn't pinpoint a motive for Sandra's actions, she presented various theories, including Jamie's life insurance policy and Sandra's supposed desire to end their marriage. Sandra's attorney, George Sechrist, presented a different perspective on the case, arguing that Sandra was a victim of investigators who had prematurely settled on a theory. He claimed that the lack of physical evidence connecting Sandra to the crime, including the absence of her blood at the scene and cuts on her hands, suggested that she was not involved. Instead, Sechrist proposed that Sandra had fallen prey to a home invasion, suffered a head injury, and was bound in her closet while intruders killed her husband. Prosecutor Barnett countered with expert testimony from Celestina Rossi, a blood spatter analyst and crime scene reconstructionist. Rossi testified that the crime scene did not match a home invasion scenario, citing the lack of forced entry, undisturbed dresser drawers, and a lit candle on Jamie's nightstand, indicating no struggle near the closet where Jamie was killed. The majority of the blood was confined to the closet, with spatter on a chair, medical stool, and comforter, which Rossi attributed to the injury to Jamie's artery. Rossi concurred with the medical examiner's report that Jamie's wounds were defensive and noted his loaded handgun near his body in the closet, untouched. This evidence, Rossi suggested, pointed to Sandra's guilt. The jury deliberated for 8 hours over several days before finding Sandra guilty of murder, sentencing her to 27 years in prison. The jury foreman later explained that they did not believe Sandra was a threat to society and wanted to give her a chance to see her grandchildren. When the verdict was read, Sandra let out a shriek and nearly collapsed into her seat. The courtroom, filled with supporters who believed in her innocence, was left in stunned disbelief. As Sandra was escorted out of the courtroom, she paused to embrace her daughter Liz one last time. Liz was devastated, feeling that the justice system had failed her family, taking away both her parents. Sandra's supporters were outraged at Barnett, accusing her of manipulating Sandra's words, exploiting her religious beliefs, and fabricating a false narrative that led to her imprisonment. In contrast, the jury foreman stood by the verdict, believing Barnett's version of events was the most plausible. He found Sandra's story inconsistent, citing her changing account of their return home and the time Jamie spent in the jacuzzi before she retreated to her closet. He also questioned the authenticity of her seizure that night, referencing her medical records, which indicated stable seizures, and her visit to the neurologist after the murder, during which she made no mention of the alleged seizure. The foreman stated that the more he listened to Sandra's statements, the more he realized they didn't make sense. He believed the evidence pointed to her guilt, but acknowledged that the jury could be wrong. A month after the verdict, Sandra's lawyer, Sechrist, filed a motion for a new trial, arguing that the investigation was inept, and the prosecution's case was built on conjecture and hypotheses with no solid evidence. Sechrist contended that Sandra was innocent, but Judge Johnson denied the motion, setting in motion a potentially lengthy appeals process. Sandra, seated behind a glass partition, maintained her innocence, softly asserting that she did not kill her husband. When asked who might have committed the crime, she replied, "I wish I knew." She clings to hope for a future release, whether through a successful appeal or parole, which she will be eligible for in 2031, when she will be 71 years old. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Jacqueline Vandergriff. Born on March 4, 1992, in Carrollton, Texas, Jacqueline "Jackie" Vandergriff was the younger of 2 daughters. She grew up in the Colony, Frisco, Texas, surrounded by her loving family. Before she could even walk, Jackie demonstrated a natural talent for gymnastics by learning to somersault. This early start sparked a passion that would drive her future success. Recognizing her potential, her parents enrolled her in gymnastics classes at just 3 years old. As she grew, she refined her skills and enthusiastically participated in various competitions. Those who knew Jackie described her as a kind and empathetic person with a heart of gold. She genuinely cared about others and was a loyal friend who inspired those around her to be their best selves. Her presence brought comfort and joy to everyone she met, whether through words of encouragement or simply being a listening ear. Jackie's kindness knew no bounds, extending far beyond her human relationships to encompass a deep love for all living beings. A lifelong vegetarian, she was a fierce supporter of pet adoption from no-kill shelters and had a special place in her heart for animals. In her free time, Jackie was an avid reader and found solace in the magical world of Harry Potter, her favorite book series. Music was another one of her passions, with an eclectic taste that ranged from Pink to James Taylor and Rob Thomas. She was especially fond of musicals, with Rent being her absolute favorite. She would attend every performance that came to town. After graduating from Wakeland High School in Frisco, Jackie decided to pursue her passion for beauty by enrolling in the Paul Mitchell School for Cosmetology. Jackie Vandergriff pursued her passion for beauty and wellness by becoming a licensed esthetician. She then took her education to the next level by enrolling at Texas Women's University, where she majored in nutrition and food science. Her goal was to help others understand the importance of good nutrition and make healthy lifestyle choices. With a bright future ahead, Jackie seemed destined for success. She was on track to make a positive impact in the world. Tragically, her life was cut short in the summer of 2016 when she had a fatal encounter with a dangerous individual. Upon arriving at the scene, the officer found a worn footpath in a wooded area and followed it to a burned-out patch of land. There, he discovered a plastic blue kiddie pool containing a body that had been set on fire, making it unrecognizable. Due to the severity of the burns, it was impossible to determine the body's identity, including its age, gender, race, or any other distinguishing features. The remains were taken to the medical examiner's office for further examination. Later, fingerprint identification revealed that the body belonged to 24-year-old Jackie Vandergriff. As detectives investigated Jackie's final hours, they discovered that she was last seen in Denton, near College, where she visited 2 bars, Fry Street Public House and Shots and Crafts. While waiting for security footage from these establishments, the medical examiner performed an autopsy on Jackie's body. The examination revealed that Jackie was killed, dismembered, decapitated, and set on fire, with further mutilation occurring after her death. The most disturbing aspect of Jackie's murder was the removal of her heart from her body. As news of her death spread throughout Denton, the detectives started receiving numerous tips from people who reported seeing a suspicious individual lurking around the crime scene where a fire had been set. After further investigation, the detectives were able to acquire CCTV footage from 2 bars that Jackie had visited in the hours leading up to her murder. At 7 p.m., a man entered the Fry Street Public House and had a drink at the bar. An hour later, Jackie walked in and struck up a conversation with the bartender and the man. Security footage showed their interactions, suggesting a potential connection between them. About 45 minutes after arriving at the bar, Jackie tweeted, "Glad I decided to get off Tinder and walk to a bar." Later, Jackie and the man left the bar together and headed to Shots and Crafts, where they socialized with a group of women. At around 9:45 p.m., Jackie and the man departed Shots and Crafts together. Surveillance cameras tracked their movements, showing them arriving at a convenience store where his car was parked. Jackie got into his vehicle, and that's the last time she was seen before her murder. The detective interviewed the bartender at the Fry Street Public House, where Jackie had applied for a job and had a friendly conversation with the bartender and a male customer. Although the bartender couldn't provide any information about what happened to Jackie and the man after they left the bar, The investigation led the detectives to Shots and Crafts, where security footage showed Jackie and the man together. One of the women at the bar recalled receiving a business card from the man, who was a personal trainer. She had exchanged contact information with him because she was interested in fitness. At first, this detail seemed unimportant, but it would later prove to be a crucial discovery in the case. After handing over the card, she willingly shared the information with the investigators. The card belonged to Charles Bryant. Meanwhile, the detectives had obtained security footage from Walmart, taken at 4 a.m., showing Charles buying a shovel. The detectives then launched a thorough investigation into Charles Bryant's identity, as he was the last person seen with Jackie before her murder. The results were deeply disturbing. Charles Bryant, a 29-year-old man, lived 20 miles away from Denton, but he was drawn to the city for a specific reason. He was desperate to rekindle his relationship with his ex-girlfriend, Caitlin, who lived in Grapevine and attended the University of North Texas. 3 months prior, Caitlin had met Charles at her home in Grapevine, where she worked as a server at a restaurant. On her high school graduation day, Charles stood out from the high school boys Caitlin knew. He was almost a decade older, in his late 20s, and had a muscular physique covered in tattoos. Working as a personal trainer and bartender, Charles had accumulated unique skills and traits that fascinated Caitlin. In the summer of 2016, Caitlin spent most days with Charles at Grapevine Lake. As they spent more time together, their attraction grew, and Caitlin was drawn to Charles's mysterious personality. However, not everyone was pleased with their relationship. Caitlin's mother noticed the significant age difference between them as they grew closer. Caitlin's mother asked to see a photo of Charles, wanting to understand her daughter's relationship better. Although initially open-minded, she felt uneasy when she saw his piercing eyes, sensing something evil. Growing increasingly worried about Caitlin's well-being, her mother voiced her concerns, advising her to reevaluate her relationship with Charles. Caitlin ignored her mother's warnings, brushing them off as typical parental worries. She was blind to the danger signs beneath the surface of her innocent-sounding romance. Unbeknownst to her, her harmless feelings were about to escalate into a terrifying experience. At first, Caitlin was thrilled with her new relationship with her older boyfriend, but as time went on, she began to have doubts and wondered if her mother had been right all along. Charles seemed overly self-absorbed and controlling, and Caitlin couldn't shake the feeling that he had an inflated sense of self-importance. Charles frequently made Caitlin feel inadequate by telling her she'd never find someone as good as him. As she prepared to leave for college in mid-August 2016, she realized she couldn't ignore the red flags in their relationship any longer and decided to break up with him. The next day, Charles appeared at Caitlin's home, begging her to take him back and promising to change. She initially gave in, but soon realized her mistake. Within a week, Caitlin had moved to Denton for college and ended the relationship once and for all. However, Charles refused to accept the breakup. On August 24th, police stopped him on the University of North Texas campus due to his suspicious driving. Although they initially suspected he was driving under the influence, his blood alcohol level was within the legal limit. Instead, they found he had several outstanding warrants, arrested him, and later released him after several hours. After their breakup, Charles showed up at Caitlin's dorm room at the University of North Texas, which he had somehow found. Caitlin called 911, and by the time the police arrived, Charles was gone. When the officer asked Caitlin what happened, she explained that she had ended their relationship because she was tired of how Charles treated her and spoke to her. Despite this, Charles refused to accept the breakup. The police issued a temporary no trespass order, banning Charles from the UNT campus. However, Charles was determined to find a way to reach Caitlin, even if it meant ignoring the restrictions. On August 31st, Charles found Caitlin on her first day at a new job. When Caitlin saw him, she told him to leave. Caitlin then scheduled a meeting with her manager to discuss the situation and ask that Charles be barred from entering the business. However, the manager told Caitlin that he couldn't grant her request. Caitlin was forced to quit her job because of an incident at her workplace. Charles was determined to confront her and would stop at nothing to exact his revenge and cause her more harm. This led to a cycle of fear and intimidation, putting Caitlin's life in danger. Caitlin's mother was worried about her safety and wanted her to come home, but Caitlin felt safe living in her dorm room on the University of Nebraska campus. However, on September 6th, Charles suddenly appeared at her dorm room, banging on the door and urging Caitlin to come out, claiming he had something for her. Fearing the worst, Caitlin hid in her friend's closet, too scared to emerge. Caitlin's deep-seated fears intensified as she imagined the worst-case scenarios that Charles might have planned for her. Fearing for her life, she made a quick decision and called the emergency services while hiding in a closet, speaking in a barely audible whisper, terrified that Charles might overhear her. Despite the dispatcher's efforts, Caitlin's voice was hardly audible due to her overwhelming fear. Meanwhile, the police arrived at the scene, but Charles had already escaped. However, he left behind a haunting reminder of his presence, a bouquet of flowers and a handwritten 2-page letter addressed to Caitlin. The letter contained unsettling messages that further fueled Caitlin's fear. Shortly after the incident, the police caught up with Charles outside the campus, where he was dressed in athletic wear, pretending to be a student out for a jog. He was arrested for trespassing and released on bail a few hours later. Caitlin tried to cut all ties with Charles by blocking him on her phone, email, and social media. However, he persisted in finding ways to reach out to her, creating multiple accounts to stay in touch. As Charles's behavior became increasingly threatening, the police intervened to help Caitlin get a protective court order. The very next day, she officially filed a petition for the order, which legally protected her from further harassment. After his first arrest, Charles continued to contact Caitlin despite a protective order against him. This led to his second arrest for stalking. He was arrested again just 2 weeks later for violating the protective order once more. While out on bail, Charles went to a location where Caitlin often hung out, where detectives suspected he met Jackie Vandergriff. Although there was no physical evidence linking Charles to Jackie's murder, detectives were concerned for Caitlin's safety due to the circumstantial evidence. Charles sent Caitlin several messages, including photos and texts, which led to his fourth arrest for violating the protective order. While in jail, detectives questioned Charles about Jackie's murder, but he denied any involvement. A search of Charles's home turned up a large military-style knife, Jackie's school purse, and a kiddie pool that matched the one where her body was found. Detectives consulted an expert who specialized in dealing with prolific killers, who believed Charles was hiding something. The expert used a friendly and casual approach to try to gain Charles's trust and get him to talk about the crime. By suggesting possible scenarios and portraying Jackie as an instigator, the expert tried to get Charles to open up. During the 3-hour interrogation, Charles's story changed, and he eventually admitted to unintentionally killing Jackie during what he called kinky sex. Detectives believed the motive behind the murder was Charles's uncontrollable rage towards Caitlin, his ex-girlfriend. Charles claimed that Jackie asked him to choke her with a large zip tie he had in his car, but he insisted that her death was an accident, and neither of them had intentionally tightened the zip tie. After the interview, Charles Bryant was arrested and charged with Jackie Vandergriff's murder. Following his arrest, Charles's ex-girlfriend Caitlin went on social media and checked Jackie's Facebook page, only to discover that they were already friends. This discovery made Caitlin remember receiving a friend request from Jackie's Facebook page on the day Jackie's body was found, before Caitlin knew about the case. Caitlin became convinced that Charles, the prime suspect in Jackie's murder, must have used Jackie's phone to send her the friend request. Christy, who had met Charles on a dating app, was shocked to learn that he had been charged with murder. In her brief time with Charles, she noticed several red flags. He was quiet and reserved, but he became attached to her quickly. When she ended their relationship, Charles persisted, professing his love despite never having kissed. Christie, who worked with abused children, recognized patterns in Charles's behavior that were similar to those she had seen in her young clients. She suspected that Charles might have been a victim of child abuse. One day, she gathered the courage to ask him directly. To her surprise, Charles admitted to having experienced childhood trauma. The police couldn't find any evidence to support Charles's claims of being abused. Despite this, Christie believed him because she thought he was a kind person and felt sorry for him. She kept in touch with him, but from a distance, and never thought he was capable of murder. Jackie's autopsy didn't provide many answers, such as how she died or where she was killed before her body was dismembered and set on fire. This lack of evidence made it difficult for the prosecution to build a strong murder case, as many key questions remained unanswered. Charles admitted to getting rid of Jackie's body after she died accidentally during rough sex. Although he confessed to disposing of her body, he denied killing her. The prosecution wanted Charles's ex-girlfriend, Caitlin, to testify about his history of stalking and violent behavior. They hoped to show a connection between his anger towards Caitlin and his eventual murder of Jackie, who bore a strong resemblance to Caitlin, as Charles himself acknowledged during questioning. Caitlin testified in court without a jury present, but when asked to identify Charles, she was hesitant and uncomfortable. She eventually pointed him out, commenting on his smirk. After testifying, Caitlin left the courtroom and broke down in tears, overcome with emotion. The judge later ruled that Caitlin would not be allowed to share details about her past relationship with Charles in front of the jury. A year and a half after Jackie's death, Charles went on trial for her murder in April 2018. However, Jackie's best friend couldn't bring herself to attend the trial, finding the thought of facing Charles in person too distressing. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sandra Cantu. Sandra Cantu was an 8-year-old girl who lived with her mother, Maria Chavez, and their family in the Orchard Estates mobile home park in Tracy, California. Despite her parents being separated, Sandra remained close to her father and enjoyed a positive relationship with him. Sandra was a friendly and energetic child who loved playing with her friends in the neighborhood. She was known for her bright smile and optimistic outlook, making her a favorite among her peers and the adults who knew her. At the time, she was a second-grade student at Melville S. Jacobson Elementary School. On March 27, 2009, Sandra returned home from school around 2 p.m. and went out to play with her friends. Her mother, Maria, usually let her play outside until dinner time. However, when Sandra failed to return home by 7 p.m., Maria began to worry. Maria tried to locate Sandra by calling her friends, but none of them had seen her. She then drove around the neighborhood, asking people if they had seen Sandra, but no one had any information. At 7:53 p.m., Maria called 911 to report her daughter missing. The Tracy Police Department quickly responded to the mobile home park and launched a search operation. They asked Maria to describe Sandra's clothing, which included a pink Hello Kitty shirt, black leggings, and Hannah Montana flip-flops. The police then went door to door, questioning neighbors and showing Sandra's picture to gather information. The search for Sandra was a large-scale operation that involved the FBI, cadaver dogs, helicopters, and a team of volunteers. The police showed Sandra's photos to everyone in the community, hoping to find any leads. However, their initial efforts yielded no results. Police are worried, as Sandra always followed safety rules when leaving with her family. They suspect someone familiar might have lured her. Initially, they suspect her father Daniel, who hadn't seen her in a long time, and was in a financial dispute with her mother Maria. However, he's eventually cleared. The police then focus on an unfamiliar ice cream vendor and Frank Waller, a rumored pedophile who allegedly kissed Sandra 2 years prior. Frank admits to being attracted to young girls, but is eventually eliminated. Authorities will continue to monitor him. As the search continues, the community supports Maria. During a vigil, a neighbor finds a disturbing handwritten note near a mailbox and shares it with the officers. A cryptic message was discovered, stating, "Cantu locked in stolen suitcase, thrown in water on Bachet Road and Whitehall Road. Witness." The note's spelling mistakes and suspicious appearance raised questions about its authenticity and the intentions of its writer. Investigators needed more information and decided to interview Melissa, Sandra's neighbor and a Sunday school teacher at her grandfather's church. Melissa explained that she had recently gone through a divorce and a breakup, and now lived with her grandparents and her 5-year-old daughter. Sandra and her sisters often visited Melissa's trailer to play with her daughter, which created a close bond between the two families. When Melissa was questioned, she admitted that she didn't notice anything unusual when she found the note, and she allowed the FBI to search her car. Inside the glove compartment, they found a note with scribbled words, suggesting someone tried to conceal the message. The note was sent for further analysis, and Melissa was released. Weeks passed without any sign of Sandra, but her case took a shocking turn when her body was found inside a black suitcase in an irrigation pond. The suitcase had floated to the surface after the pond was filled 2 weeks prior. Sandra's body was identified by the clothes she was wearing, and an autopsy revealed that she had many cuts and wounds. The suitcase was locked and had an extra cord securing it, indicating that the killer wanted to keep it closed for a longer time. The grim discovery left everyone in shock and horror. The farmer who found the suitcase, Jose Luis Franco, was rewarded $20,000 for alerting the authorities. The autopsy revealed that Sandra had been severely assaulted, with no signs of biological fluids, but indications of an unknown object being used. The cause of death was asphyxiation, and a high dose of alprazolam was found in her system, suggesting she had been drugged. The official cause of death was ruled as homicidal asphyxiation. Tragically, it was determined that Sandra had been murdered just hours after she was last seen on surveillance footage, sending shockwaves through the community. The investigation revealed that Sandra's killer was not a random abductor, but someone she knew. The police pieced together a profile of their potential suspect. A white male, aged between 25 and 40, with a history of sexual assault or possessing child abuse material. The investigation took a surprising turn when a neighbor reported seeing a dark purple, two-toned SUV near the irrigation pond on the day Sandra disappeared. The car's unusual color and unfamiliarity in the area raised suspicions, and the neighbor's description matched a woman named Melissa Huckabee. Surveillance cameras showed Melissa getting into her SUV near Sandra's house around 3:30 p.m. and then driving towards her own house. She was later seen near the pond around 5:30 p.m. This timeline placed Melissa in the area around the time Sandra went missing, making her a prime suspect. However, when the police approached Melissa, they found that she had attempted suicide by ingesting razor blades and was hospitalized. When questioned later, Melissa claimed she was unaware of what had transpired and had only brought a note to the attention of the authorities. She denied any involvement in Sandra's murder. The police investigated Melissa's alibi and found that her phone records were crucial evidence. Earlier, Melissa had reported a theft to the police, claiming that her suitcase was stolen from her driveway around 4 p.m. She even sent a text message to Maria, mentioning the stolen suitcase. This was significant because the suitcase found with Sandra's body matched the one Melissa reported stolen. Despite the evidence, the authorities wanted more information, so they wiretapped Melissa's phone and waited for her hospital release. When she was released, they were shocked to discover that she had called the Cantu family. Melissa invited one of Sandra's siblings to her home, but when the police responded, they found no children. suggesting that Melissa might have been planning to lure another child to her house. A neighbor then came forward, revealing that Melissa had taken a 7-year-old girl to the park without permission, and she was found to have been drugged with benzodiazepines, the same drug found in Sandra's body. The police suspicion of Melissa grew, and they discovered a notebook in her trailer with handwriting matching the note she claimed to have found. They also found a cryptic note in her car and a drug prescribed to her that matched the one in Sandra's body. During a search of her grandparents' church, they found a rolling pin with blood that matched Sandra's DNA profile and a window blind missing a drawer cord, which matched the cord used to secure the suitcase. This led to Melissa's arrest on suspicion of kidnapping and murder. Melissa Huckabee, a California woman, has been accused of killing 8-year-old Sandra Cantu and faces multiple charges, including sexual assault. Authorities do not expect to make any further arrests in the case. When questioned by investigators, Huckabee initially denied any involvement, but later claimed that Sandra's death was an accident. She said she was playing a game of hide-and-seek with Sandra and her own daughter, and Sandra agreed to hide in a suitcase. Huckabee claimed she forgot Sandra was inside and only remembered when she arrived at a church, finding Sandra's lifeless body. Huckabee eventually confessed to zipping Sandra into the suitcase and leaving her there until it was too late. She then dumped the suitcase containing Sandra's body into a nearby pond. Further investigation into Huckabee's personal life revealed a troubled past, including criminal activities, depression, and other mental health issues. She had a history of theft convictions and had filed for bankruptcy due to credit card debt and medical expenses. Huckabee's family members, including her father and ex-husband, described her as struggling with depression and having issues with her self-image. Despite this, they said she was not prone to violent behavior. Huckabee is currently under suicide watch and faces multiple charges related to Sandra's death. The trial of Melissa Huckabee began on April 14th. During the proceedings, she became emotional when the prosecution described her criminal actions. She closed her eyes and struggled to hold back tears. Prosecutor Thomas Tester presented evidence that Melissa had planned Sandra's murder. Surveillance footage showed that Sandra had intended to visit Melissa's house. The prosecutor alleged that Melissa took Sandra to a church, where she gave her juice laced with a powerful sedative. Once Sandra was unconscious, Melissa attacked and suffocated her to death. Initially, the prosecutor sought the death penalty against Melissa, as she had not yet pleaded guilty to the crimes. However, during the trial, Melissa made a sudden decision to plead guilty, taking full responsibility for her actions. Before accepting her plea, Judge Linda Luss questioned Melissa to ensure she had discussed the matter with her lawyers and was certain about giving up her right to a jury trial. Melissa confirmed that she was resolute in her decision. Prosecutor Thomas Tester raised concerns about Melissa Huckabee's mental state after Judge Luss finished questioning her. He cited her unusual behavior in prison, including a self-harm incident, which made him question her ability to make rational decisions. Although Melissa seemed coherent in court, Tester worried about her decision-making in the long run. Despite Judge Luss's reassurance, Tester asked Melissa if she understood the situation, likely fearing she might retract her guilty plea. Melissa's admission of guilt marked a significant turning point in the case, bringing some closure to the Cantu family and avoiding a lengthy trial. This crucial moment simplified the legal proceedings and provided the Cantu family with some comfort after Sandra's tragic death. It also paved the way for what would happen next in the case. On June 14, 2010, Melissa Huckabee was sentenced to life in prison without parole for the intentional and premeditated murder of Sandra Cantu. The prosecution alleged 3 special circumstances in this case. Firstly, it was alleged that Huckabee committed the murder while kidnapping Sandra Cantu, a violation of Penal Code Sections 207 and 209. Secondly, it was alleged that Huckabee committed the murder while engaged in another crime. Thirdly, It was alleged that Huckabee committed the murder during or immediately after attempting to commit rape by instrument, a violation of Penal Code Section 289, as defined in Penal Code Section 1.2. The prosecution has warned that any evidence presented at a preliminary hearing may also be used in future probation violation proceedings or discovery requests. Melissa Huckabee is accused of murdering Sandra Cantu and initially faced additional charges for drugging a 7-year-old girl, although these charges were later dropped as part of a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. Melissa has pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder and kidnapping of Sandra Cantu. Her heinous crime against a young girl in Tracy, California shocked the nation, and today the court will determine her punishment. This morning, there will be 2 hearings related to the Sandra Cantu murder case. The first hearing will focus on Melissa's sentencing, followed by a decision on whether to lift the gag order. Our correspondent, Latia Arar, is reporting live from outside the San Joaquin County Courthouse in Stockton, where it promises to be a very busy day. In just 3 hours, Melissa Huckabee will be formally sentenced for the murder and kidnapping of 8-year-old Sandra Cantu. The community and Sandra's family are eager for the proceedings to come to an end. Last month, Melissa pleaded guilty and will likely spend the rest of her life in prison without parole. As part of her plea deal, the rape charge against Melissa was dropped, sparing her from the death penalty. During her sentencing, Melissa expressed remorse and confusion over her actions, directly addressing Sandra's mother. She acknowledged that she couldn't understand her own motivations, saying that she wished she could give an explanation for what had happened, and that she still couldn't understand why she had done what she had done. Melissa also apologized, saying that for the pain she had caused, saying sorry wasn't enough, but it was all she could do. She added that since the day Sandra had died, she had had to live with the consequences of her actions, and that for the rest of her life, she would have to live with the responsibility of Sandra's death. Sandra's father expressed his struggle to forgive Melissa, saying that they were supposed to forgive their enemies, but he didn't know what to make of her. He added that nothing that happened that day would change the fact that she had taken the life of an innocent little girl who hadn't even gotten to decide what ice cream to eat. The community was deeply affected by Sandra's tragic death. On April 16, 2019, over 600 people attended her funeral to pay their respects. To honor her memory, volunteers planted a tree and built a new playground at Jacobson Elementary School, and one of her cousins started an annual celebration called Tracy Celebrates Children, which helps local kids get fingerprinted and photographed in case they go missing. The prosecutors believed that Melissa deliberately planned and executed the tragic event, but she never shared her motives, leaving investigators baffled. Melissa's past struggles with depression, difficult history, and self-harm were revealed in documents, but they didn't provide a clear explanation for her actions. Melissa is now serving a life sentence in San Juan County Jail, a constant reminder that serious crimes have serious consequences. While the pain of losing Sandra will never fully heal, her family finds solace in knowing that justice has been served, and her death did not go unanswered. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Chad Durman. Chad Durman, a 32-year-old man from Claremont County, Ohio, was married to 34-year-old Laura. They had a blended family with 3 young sons, Hunter 4, Clayton 3, and Chase 7, and a teenage stepdaughter, Alexis 16. Laura stayed at home to care for the children while Chad worked to support the family. On June 15, 2023, Chad arrived home from work earlier than usual and suggested taking a nap with his family. He invited Laura and their 3 sons to join him in their bedroom, where they spent some time laughing and chatting together. However, this joyful moment would soon turn into a horrific tragedy. After a few minutes, Chad got up and opened the gun safe next to their bed. He retrieved a MAR model HC-22 rifle, loaded it, and shot his 4-year-old son Hunter twice. The sound of the gunshot was heard by Alexis, who was watching TV in the family room. She rushed to the bedroom to see what had happened. As Alexis reached the doorway, she was met with a horrific scene, her brother being shot. Overcome with terror, she turned and fled as fast as possible. Meanwhile, Laura, who was with her kids, rushed to help her son Hunter, who had been injured. She yelled at the other children to run for their lives. Alexis saw the eldest boy fleeing in the wrong direction, towards a field, and shouted at him to keep running. Chad, however, was hot on his heels, and soon shot his own 7-year-old son, Clayton. As Clayton fell to the ground, bleeding severely, Chad stood over him, seemingly triumphant. Alexis witnessed this horror and was paralyzed with fear. She then turned and ran back into the house, grabbed her youngest brother, and fled to safety, desperate to save their lives. Chad pursued her, caught up, and pointed his gun at her, demanding that she hand over the 3-year-old, Chase. Alexis begged and pleaded with Chad to spare her life, but he tried to shoot her in the head, only to find he had run out of bullets. Alexis took advantage of the reprieve and escaped to the nearby fire station, where she frantically stopped a passerby to get help. At 4:15 p.m., a girl called 911 to report that her stepfather had killed everyone in her house. The police arrived at the scene 10 minutes later, at 4:25 p.m., and found Chad sitting on the porch with a rifle beside him. They quickly arrested him and placed him in handcuffs. Despite the chaos, Chad remained calm and didn't resist arrest. Meanwhile, his stepdaughter Laura was taken to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center to receive treatment for her injuries. Fortunately, Chad's stepdaughter Alexis had managed to escape from the house earlier that day, avoiding the fate of her 3 brothers, who were tragically killed by her stepfather. Chad was officially arrested at 4:27 p.m. on June 15, 2023. When the police took Chad into custody, he showed no signs of distress or remorse, instead behaving politely as though nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. He was later taken to jail for further questioning and investigation. During the interrogation, Chad confessed to police that he had been planning the murders since October 2022. Chad told investigators that he had gone without sleep for 3 to 4 days because the idea of harming his own sons was too much to bear. This admission provided a disturbing glimpse into his state of mind in the days leading up to the tragedy. Investigators also looked into whether Chad had a history of aggressive behavior. Chad's phone records were reviewed as part of the investigation, which revealed that he had a history of traffic violations in Claremont County, with one exception, a criminal damage incident that occurred when he was 18 years old. Additionally, a 2010 domestic violence case was discovered, in which Chad was accused of choking his father, Keith Derman. However, the case was eventually dropped due to Keith Derman's failure to appear in court as a witness for the prosecution. These records provided valuable insight into Chad's legal history and past dealings with law enforcement in the county. Meanwhile, one of Chad's neighbors, Richard Kanan, told a news channel that Chad was angry on a daily basis. The woman who called 911 also gave an interview to the news channel, describing how she was running with her little black lab and frantically screaming, "Call 911, call 911" during the incident. Chad's property tax records show that he was up to date with his payments until 2023, suggesting that he was not experiencing financial difficulties with his mortgage. When questioned by detectives, his 59-year-old father, Keith Derman, was left stunned and struggling to come to terms with the news. "I'm still trying to understand," he said. Keith Derman expressed his disbelief that his son could commit such a heinous crime. He also hinted that Chad was struggling with personal issues that had become too much to handle. The community was deeply shocked by the news of the killings, with neighbors expressing their surprise and stating that they never would have expected such actions from Chad. Initially, Chad confessed to the crimes during his interrogation, pleading guilty to all charges. However, during his first court hearing on June 23, 2023, he changed his plea to not guilty. At a subsequent hearing on the same day, Chad appeared visibly distraught, wearing a green bulletproof vest and breaking down in tears as prosecutors detailed the horrific events of June 15. The judge described the case as an act of unimaginable cruelty. The father, who stands before the court, intentionally murdered his 3 young sons, aged 3, 4, and 7, in his own home using a rifle. The chief prosecutor revealed that Chad meticulously planned the events, reflecting a disturbing premeditation. One of his sons attempted to escape by running away in a nearby field, but Chad chased and caught the boy, dragging him back to the yard where he was subsequently killed alongside his brothers. The trauma inflicted by this man on his family, the community, law enforcement, first responders, and society at large is unfathomable. While there has been a full admission of guilt, the case is still unfolding, and the full extent of the facts is still being discovered. However, the sheer horror of what is known so far is almost impossible to comprehend. Chad's murder of his own sons is one of the most horrific, craven, and cowardly acts imaginable. According to the detailed bill of particulars filed in Claremont County, the judge was presented with a disturbing account of the events. The prosecutor read aloud the sequence of incidents that led to the tragedy. Chad deliberately planned and executed the killings, lining up his sons and shooting them. When their mother attempted to intervene, Chad shot her in the hand. The prosecutor revealed that Chad fired a total of 9 shots, causing devastating harm. One boy was hit once, while the other 2 were each struck 4 times. The prosecutor, Mark T.L., emphasized the brutality of Chad's actions, stating that the brutal killings left the family and community in a state of shock. Prosecutor Mark Talvey revealed that Chad Dorman confessed to the murder, saying, "I did it. Take me to jail. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have shot them." During the interrogation, Chad also pleaded guilty. As a result, Talvey is seeking the death penalty. In a statement to the media after the court hearing, Talvey expressed his outrage, calling the crime the most sickening and horrifying he has seen. He imagined the terror the victims felt as their father, who was supposed to protect them, murdered them. Talvey vowed to do everything in his power to ensure Chad Dorman spends the rest of his life in prison. He began by offering his deepest sympathy to the family for their unspeakable tragedy. Chad Dorman is accused of committing a horrific act of violence against his own family, resulting in the tragic deaths of his 3 young sons, Hunter, Clayton, and Chase. He faces 21 charges, including 9 counts of aggravated murder, 8 counts of kidnapping, and 4 counts of felonious assault, which could lead to the death penalty if convicted. The grand jury has indicted Dorman on these charges, and he is currently being held in the Claremont County Jail with a bail set at $20 million, the highest in the county's history. Dorman's lawyer has entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming that he was suffering from a serious mental illness at the time of the killings. The lawyer argues that executing someone with a serious mental illness is cruel and unusual punishment, violating both the Ohio and U.S. constitutions. The prosecution has requested a mental evaluation, and a court date has been set for May 3, 2024, to discuss the lawyer's request. The defense has agreed to provide a report from a mental health expert by June 3, 2024, to support their claim. Meanwhile, a judge has ruled that Dorman's confession will be thrown out due to violations of his Miranda rights during police interrogation. The police failed to fully read him his rights and continued questioning him after he requested an attorney. Several witnesses, including police officers, have testified in court, describing their encounters with Dorman. One officer recalled that Dorman said, "Take me to jail," during the drive to the sheriff's office, while another officer remembered Dorman referencing the Bible during his interrogation, saying that he did not kill his wife. In this case, Chad expressed a desire for a lawyer during the interrogation, but the detective ignored him. When a suspect clearly requests a lawyer during a custodial interrogation, it's not the start of a test, but rather a signal for the officer to stop questioning them. However, Detective Ross failed to cease the questioning and even left Chad alone for a while, before returning to continue the interrogation. During the court hearing, it was revealed that Detective Ross did not read Chad his full Miranda rights. When questioned about this, Ross admitted to not reading the rights verbatim, but claimed to have covered the most important parts. However, it was established that Ross had omitted crucial parts of the rights. Ultimately, the judge ruled that the investigators failed to follow proper procedures during Chad's arrest in June 2023, violating his Miranda rights. Chad's lawyers argued that during his 3-hour interrogation, Chad requested a lawyer at least twice, but the detectives disregarded his request and continued questioning him. Additionally, they claimed that Chad's earlier guilty plea was a result of intimidation by the investigators. The judge later ruled that the detectives failed to fully inform Chad of his rights before the interrogation. Thus, any statements made during that time would be inadmissible as evidence in future court proceedings. This ruling significantly impacted the trial, limiting the evidence that could be presented against Chad. The legal complexities and public interest in the case increased, with Chad facing a potential death penalty if convicted. His trial is scheduled to begin on July 8, 2024, but the recent ruling may change the course of the trial. A final court hearing is set for June 14th, just before the anniversary of the tragic events. The trial is expected to last from July 8th to August 2nd. However, the authorities are still unsure about the motive behind Chad's actions. The motive behind Chad's shooting of Clayton, Hunter, and Chase remains unknown, but some people believe it may have been an act of revenge against his 34-year-old wife, whom he suspected of infidelity. However, this motive has not been officially confirmed. Meanwhile, a memorial ride was held today to raise funds for the Dorman boys' family, with hundreds of people participating in the 15-mile ride through New Richmond. The event, which featured motorcycles, jeeps, and cars, attracted over 100 participants and was organized by Alan Easterday. The community came together to show their support for the family during this difficult time, while the boys' father awaits trial for their murder. The accused, Chad Dorman, is being held in custody at Claremont County Jail as the legal case against him continues. Many questions still linger, including what motivated him to commit such a heinous act against his own children. While the community is still searching for answers, they are holding on to hope that justice will be served and the truth will eventually come to light. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Georgine Kruger. Georgine Kruger was born on April 11, 1992, in Munich as the middle child in a family of 3. Her older brother, Tommy, was 8 years older, and her younger sister, Michelle, was 2.5 years younger. In June 2006, Georgine and her family, including her mother and sisters, relocated to Berlin. Her mother had secured a well-paying job, and they settled into a home on Stendal Street in the Mobit district. Georgine and her sister started attending one of the top local schools on September 1st, which was accessible by bus despite being in a different district. Their mother was satisfied with her new job and had ambitious plans for the future. However, their peaceful life was soon disrupted. From a young age, Georgine had aspirations of becoming an actress. Inspired by Indian films, she dedicated herself to singing and dancing. She actively pursued her passion by participating in school theater productions and taking acting and stage speech courses. Her teachers recognized her talent and predicted a successful and famous future for her. On Friday, September 22, 2006, Georgine's luck changed for the better. She successfully auditioned for a guest role in the TV series Turkish for Beginners and was expecting a call back on Monday, September 25th, to finalize the details and sign a contract. As the new girl in school, she had already caught everyone's attention. However, on Monday, September 25th, Georgine followed her usual routine and went to school. She was supposed to be back home by 2 p.m., and since she was expecting the call later that afternoon, she asked her grandmother to answer the phone. Georgine's classmates noticed that she seemed distracted and kept checking the time throughout the day. After school, Georgine quickly gathered her belongings and caught her usual bus, number 27, to head home. She got off at the bus stop, which was close to her house, but never made it home. Georgine vanished somewhere between the bus stop and her apartment and was never seen again. Her grandmother, who was expecting her granddaughters to return from school, had prepared lunch and set the table. Georgine was supposed to arrive first, followed by Michelle, who had a later dismissal due to her music classes. However, Georgine failed to appear, which was unusual because she had been looking forward to returning home and had no plans to stay out. When Michelle arrived home at 3 o'clock, her grandmother became worried because Georgine was nowhere to be found. The grandmother tried calling Georgine's phone, but it was turned off. She tried calling again and again, but there was no answer. The worry turned into fear, and when Vina came home from work and learned that her daughter was missing, she knew something was seriously wrong. The police started searching for Georgine, going from house to house, talking to everyone, and checking every possible place. They even used dogs to try to find her scent, but there was no sign of her. By the next morning, pictures of Georgine were posted all over the city, asking for anyone with information to come forward. Many people called the police, saying they had seen a girl who looked like Georgine, but none of the leads were real. At the same time, the police were checking on people who had committed crimes before, especially those who had been involved with minors. However, all their efforts did not produce any results. It was as if Georgine had disappeared into thin air, leaving behind no signs or belongings, making it seem like she never existed. After months of unsuccessful searching, the investigation into Georgine's disappearance was put on hold due to a lack of leads or clues. However, a year later, an anonymous caller claimed that her body was at the bottom of a nearby lake. Despite being unable to identify the caller, the police decided to investigate this new information. A team of skilled divers thoroughly searched the lake bed using advanced equipment but found no sign of Georgine. Although the lead proved to be false, it renewed public interest in the case. The media revisited the story, prompting the police to conduct another search operation. Investigators were certain that Georgine had passed away, but her family, the Georgines, couldn't accept this. To cope, her mother created a story that her daughter had run away to India and was now a Bollywood star, fulfilling her dreams of singing and dancing. This thought gave her comfort and strength to carry on for her younger daughter's sake. Years after her disappearance, in 2016, the search efforts started again. A resident of Stendhal Street contacted the police, concerned about a neighbor who was often inviting underage girls to his home. This neighbor was identified as 35-year-old Ali K., a Turkish immigrant. On the surface, Ali K. appeared to be a devoted family man, married with 3 children. However, a closer look revealed a disturbing truth. The police were shocked to discover that Ali K. had been investigated 4 years earlier for luring a local schoolgirl with promises of selling her a trendy smartphone at a low price. He took the teenager to the storage room in the basement of his apartment building where he physically assaulted her by hitting her on the head and then forced her into an intimate. Following the assault, he attempted to silence her by making her promise not to reveal the incident to anyone. He handed her a paper napkin to wipe away her tears and helped her clean up before releasing her. Although she agreed to remain silent in order to escape, she immediately informed her parents about the incident once she was free. Together, they reported the violent actions to the police. The schoolgirl described the storage room in the basement, saying it looked like a space created by someone with a disturbed mind. Ali K. was arrested the same day but strongly denied his guilt. He shared his own version of the events, claiming he was selling a gadget and that the teenager had expressed interest in buying it, which is why she was in his basement storage room. They went downstairs together. When the guest saw the device, she expressed her long-held desire to own one. However, due to financial constraints, she offered to compensate in an alternative manner. According to Ali, she initiated intimate contact by kissing him and beginning to undress. He attempted to reason with her and pushed her away, resulting in her falling and hitting her head. This account explained the injuries and bruises on her body. Nevertheless, there was no evidence of intimate contact, as Ali had used protection and later disposed of it. Ali's wife, Melik, supported her husband's account and accused the guest of behaving inappropriately and attempting to seduce him. Consequently, Ali received a suspended sentence for causing moderate bodily harm. As the police reopened the investigation into Georgine's disappearance, they decided to re-examine Ali thoroughly. Ali K. did not have a stable job and relied on odd jobs and benefits to get by. He had a fondness for gambling, which often led to debt. He frequently visited the Turkish coffee shop on the ground floor of his building, where he socialized with various people who would buy him food and drinks. Ali K. took great care to maintain a youthful appearance, often spending excessively on fashionable clothes, including using his children's benefits. However, his most disturbing trait was his attraction to young girls. He would frequently try to meet and interact with them, asking inappropriate questions and offering illicit favors, such as buying them alcohol or cigarettes. Despite his suspicious behavior, the police couldn't link him to the disappearance of Georgine. The case had gone cold, but with the emergence of new evidence, it was reopened, and Ali K. became a prime suspect. When questioned, he denied any involvement in Georgine's disappearance. A search of Georgine's storage room in the basement revealed no signs of Georgine. However, detectives noted that the space seemed more suited for meetings than storage. It was discovered that Ali K. had been previously questioned and his basement inspected, but the storage room had been overlooked. At the time, there was no reason to suspect him, and the door was always locked, making it inaccessible to anyone but the Ali K. Ali had been actively involved in the search operation and was one of the most dedicated members. Although the police didn't have any concrete evidence to charge Ali, they decided to keep him under surveillance to gather more information. They organized unofficial monitoring and intercepted all his phone calls, which soon yielded initial results. Detectives discovered that K had significant debts, unknown to his wife, totaling around 10,000 euros, which he had accumulated through poker losses. The investigation shifted its focus to this aspect, and undercover agents were introduced to K's close circle. Their goal was to gain his trust, extract necessary information, and obtain a recorded confession. However, they had to proceed slowly and carefully to avoid arousing K's suspicion. To achieve this, a special agent codenamed Hakan was prepared and sent in. He posed as a successful businessman who had recently moved to the Mobit area to open a car service station. Hakan visited the cafe in Ali's building a few times, where he loudly discussed business plans with a partner. As they left, the partner mentioned that they needed to find a manager soon, emphasizing that it was a well-paying position and they needed to choose the right person. After the second man departed, Hakan remained to finish his coffee. It was then that Ali K. appeared and took a seat at Hakan's table. Hakan seized the opportunity to offer himself for the manager position, initiating a conversation with Ali K. The discussion quickly transitioned into a casual chat, during which the businessman observed that Ali K. seemed well-suited for the role. As the conversation progressed, Hakan mentioned the salary associated with the position. Upon hearing the figure, Ali's eyes lit up as he began envisioning the possibilities, paying off his debts and acquiring the sports car he had long desired. The men started talking regularly after exchanging phone numbers, and their conversations quickly turned into a friendship. Hakan even took Ali on business trips to other cities to build trust and get closer to him. However, this friendship had an unexpected outcome. The suspect tried to present himself in the best possible attribute to his employer, bragging about even his smallest accomplishments and keeping quiet about any wrongdoing. Months later, with the case stalled, the investigation introduced a new agent, Susan, who posed as Hawkins' girlfriend. Her goal was to befriend Ali's wife, Malik, and uncover any secrets he might be hiding. It didn't take long for Susan and Malik to get acquainted, and soon all four were socializing together as families. Malik was a sociable person, but she had a very positive view of her husband. For years, she had ignored his infidelities, dismissed accusations of violence from a schoolgirl, and genuinely believed her husband was a good person who was just unlucky in his career. However, things were about to take a turn. Susan realized that Malik wasn't just covering up for Ali. Malik truly believed he was incapable of harming anyone. The agents devised a plan to trick the suspect, Ali K., by spreading a false rumor about a breakthrough in the Georgine case. They left a newspaper with the article in Ali's car, which they had previously installed with cameras and recording devices. When Ali's wife, Malik, found the newspaper, she briefly showed surprise that the case was still being investigated but quickly lost interest. It became clear that Malik was unaware of her husband's involvement in the crime. Despite the agents' efforts, their 6-month-long investigation yielded no confessions. Ali K. presented himself as honest and trustworthy, while Malik remained oblivious to her husband's wrongdoing. The agents had gained the trust of the Ali family to the point of being asked to look after their children, but their cover was becoming increasingly expensive to maintain. The agents had to lease a space for a fake auto repair shop and create a sham employment contract to avoid raising Ali's suspicions. In a last-ditch effort, they introduced a new agent, Kaur, who would play the role of a villain. According to the backstory, Kaur was Hawkins' cousin with a criminal record, involved in illicit businesses. It was hoped that Ali would form a bond with someone who shared similar interests and confide in them about his wrongdoings. Ali quickly befriended Kaur, and they spent time together, going to various nightclubs and indulging in reckless behavior. Kaur openly admitted that he earned his money through shady means and wanted to spend it lavishly, with Ali eager to join in. At the same time, Kaur frequently complained about his girlfriend, claiming he couldn't break up with her because she was blackmailing him and threatening to expose his illicit business activities to the authorities. According to Kaur, his girlfriend constantly demanded money, and her expectations were becoming increasingly excessive. One day, while drinking with Ali, Kaur announced that he wanted to get rid of his girlfriend, who was blackmailing him, and was willing to pay 100,000 euros to anyone who would take care of the problem. Ali's interest was piqued, and he offered to handle the task himself. Kaur agreed, but suggested they discuss the details in a private setting when they were sober. In November 2017, the two men sat in a car and discussed their plan to eliminate Kaur's troublesome girlfriend. At one point, Kaur expressed doubts about Ali's ability to murder a life. In response, Ali revealed a shocking secret that he claimed no one else knew. Ali K. confessed to taking the life of a young girl over 11 years ago. In 2006, a girl had moved onto his street, and he became infatuated with her. He would often greet her on her way to and from school, complimenting her despite her young age. He described her as attractive and admitted to having strong desires for her. On a warm September day, Ali K. saw an opportunity to act on his desires. He asked a neighbor girl to help him move items from his storage area, and she agreed, unaware of the danger. Once they were in the basement, he locked the door and attempted to kiss the girl, who resisted and screamed. He then struck her on the head, knocking her unconscious, and took advantage of her. Fearing she might report him to the police, Ali K. decided to silence her permanently. He grabbed her throat and squeezed as hard as he could, feeling her pulse fade away. He described the process in detail, including the sound of her neck cracking. The girl's body remained in the basement for several days, and Ali K. knew that if anyone had searched the area, they would have found him. However, no one suspected anything, and once the initial commotion died down, he wrapped the body in an old rug and disposed of it in a garbage bin that was taken to a landfill. Ali's confessions were recorded by a camera in Kaur's car, and he was arrested that same evening. Unfortunately, her remains were never found because the landfill where her body was taken regularly burned its waste. The trial took 2.5 years to conclude. Ali K maintained his innocence, claiming he fabricated the story to gain Kaur's trust. He said his plan was to rescue Kaur's girlfriend by turning in her to the police once he received the money. Although no other evidence was found, Ali K's detailed confession was enough to convince the jury of his guilt. In March 2020, nearly 14 years after Georgine's disappearance, Ali K was sentenced to life in prison without parole. His wife, Melik, never believed he was guilty, convinced that he had implicated himself for a noble cause. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Alejandra Lafuente. Alejandra Lafuente was a stunning brunette with captivating hair and bright brown eyes that accentuated her thick, dark eyelashes. She maintained her athletic physique through a dedicated fitness routine, which included yoga and breathing exercises. Taking care of herself was a top priority for Alejandra, and she frequently visited beauty salons, massage parlors, and spas to pamper herself. During warm weather, she could often be found lounging on the beach while still managing to get some scientific work done. On cloudy days, she would opt for tanning salons instead. It's clear that Alejandra had a deep affection for herself and believed she embodied the ideal of female attractiveness. Her career was also thriving, thanks in part to her father's influence. Alberto Dente, a renowned psychiatrist and doctor of sciences, was a leading expert in his field, with a focus on mental health conditions such as schizophrenia and manic disorders. His groundbreaking scientific work and experiments had earned him widespread recognition. Alejandra greatly admired her father and aspired to achieve similar success. She followed in his footsteps by enrolling in a prestigious university to study psychiatry, where she graduated with honors. Her strong work ethic, exceptional intelligence, and her father's influential connections enabled her to complete and defend her thesis on manic syndrome with distinction. However, Alejandra's career took an unexpected turn when she became more interested in working as a psychotherapist rather than pursuing a traditional path in psychiatry. With the financial support of her father, Alejandra obtained the necessary licensing and opened her own practice in a modern business center located in the heart of the capital. Her practice quickly gained popularity, attracting a diverse range of female clients who sought counseling for issues such as eating disorders, depression, relationship problems, and low self-esteem. Alejandra demonstrated a remarkable ability to help her clients resolve complex family issues. Despite her professional success, her personal life faced challenges. Her first marriage ultimately ended in divorce, but it was blessed with two beautiful daughters who inherited Alejandra's captivating eyes and her father's sharp sense of humor. Alejandra wasn't discouraged despite having two children. She still wanted to meet someone who could be a good partner and father to her daughters. After her separation, her ex-husband would visit on weekends to spend time with Shees and help with household chores. However, his last visit would be his final one. Alejandra asked him to enter through the backyard, claiming the front door lock was jammed. She then directed him to the bathroom, saying their youngest daughter was bathing. Unaware of the danger, he complied. The house was eerily silent, with no cartoons or children's laughter. Upon entering the bathroom, he noticed tape on the floor and an empty bathtub. At that moment, he realized something was wrong. Alejandra stood behind him, wielding a hammer. She delivered two forceful blows to his head, causing him to collapse with blood pouring from his skull. The experts later determined that the first blow was fatal, and he had no chance of saving himself. The eldest daughter returned home early from a friend's house and became an unintentional witness to a horrific scene. The children had often seen their parents arguing, and Alejandra, who was believed to have mental health issues, would frequently lash out at her friends and even physically attack her husband. Her friends and housemates had observed her outbursts and erratic behavior on multiple occasions. On this particular day, the situation escalated out of control. The daughter fled the house and called for help, prompting a neighbor to rush over and contact the police. Alejandra, a psychologist, was arrested and charged with murder. She spent a month in a cell awaiting her initial court hearing. During the trial, Alejandra maintained her innocence. Her lawyers argued that she had acted in self-defense, claiming that her ex-husband was excessively jealous and had fabricated stories about her bringing men into the house, which could harm the mental well-being of their daughters. According to their version of events, on the day of the crime, the ex-husband had shown up unexpectedly at Alejandra's house, entering through the back door in an attempt to catch her with another man. He then allegedly attacked Alejandra, who was in the bathroom trying to assemble a nightstand. She was forced to defend herself and delivered 2 blows to the back of her ex-husband's head. On June 14, 2012, the court delivered its verdict. Considering the evidence presented by her defense team and the fact that she had 2 young children, Alejandra was sentenced to 1 year and 4 months in prison. However, thanks to the efforts of her lawyers and her father's financial support, her prison term was commuted to a suspended sentence. A few months later, her team filed an appeal, requesting that the charges be dropped. The basis of the appeal was that Alejandra had acted in self-defense. Human rights activists rallied around her, calling for a jury trial and portraying her as a victim of domestic violence. The court reviewed her case and ultimately handed down an acquittal. After her release, Alejandra resumed her work as a psychological counselor. She cultivated an image as a victim of gender inequality who had fought for her rights and won. This newfound image boosted Alejandra's popularity among potential clients. She soon met Alan Carrera Cuellar, a wealthy Mexican businessman and the son of Adrian Carrera Francis. Alan was tall, handsome, and impressive. His father had previously headed the Special Services Department for the Central District and had achieved significant success in his career. Soon Alan expanded his business, creating a chain of construction stores that opened across the country. However, while part of his business was legitimate, another part was secretly linked to crime. This connection led to his father's removal from his position after one of Alan's financial frauds was exposed. Furthermore, Alan had a stake in a criminal group that transported psychotropic substances to the United States. Their base, located in a border town, was guarded by corrupt police officers and controlled a small portion of the psychoactive substance trade in the South. Alan's father was found to be involved in his son's activities, and after providing a statement to the police, he faced a 20-year prison sentence. Nevertheless, Adrian Carrera was released early on July 18, 2000, as part of the Witness Protection Program. Upon release, he dedicated himself to his son and legitimate business ventures. His son, Alan Carrera, quickly adopted his father's views and experiences. After graduating from college, Alan followed in his father's footsteps and became an entrepreneur, showing particular interest in a household appliance store that he successfully managed despite his young age. This business was smaller than his father's but generated a decent income. Alan was always surrounded by women, yet he had been in love with a classmate since childhood, whom he eventually married. She was intelligent, attractive, and came from a good family. The marriage, though brief, was vibrant and resulted in a beautiful daughter. However, Alan's frequent absence from home due to work led to the breakdown of their marriage, ultimately ending in divorce. Alan struggled to move on from his high school sweetheart. He found no joy in new books and was immersed himself by loneliness and sadness, which led him to develop a drinking problem. To overcome his prolonged depression and alcohol addiction, Alan tried various methods, including books, AA meetings, and therapy. Eventually, he met with Dr. Alberto, a renowned psychiatrist. Meanwhile, Alan's ex-wife, Maria, was also dealing with the aftermath of their difficult divorce. Her father was going through a similar experience. Despite their separation, Maria couldn't shake off her loneliness and still considered Alan the only man in her life. She decided to seek professional help and visited a therapist. However, the psychiatrist who had been helping Alan recover explained that due to ethical reasons, he couldn't counsel both spouses. He recommended that Maria seek guidance from a different therapist, Alejandra. However, it's notable that Alejandra's relationship with Maria wasn't transparent, as she didn't disclose that her father was involved. Alejandra soon realized Alan could be a suitable match. Alan was described as a pleasant and wealthy man in his prime. Without hesitation, Alejandra asked Maria to bring Alan in for another session. According to Alejandra, she could resolve their issues in a single session. During the session, Alejandra and her father put their plan to seduce the Alan into action. It didn't take long to get results. Immediately after the session, Alan asked Alejandra out for coffee to discuss family issues. Initially, she declined, citing medical ethics, but they went on a date that same evening. A romantic affair quickly developed between them. However, Maria soon discovered their relationship and was shocked. She considered reporting Alejandra to the Medical Ethics Committee but decided against it. As a skilled therapist, Alejandra convinced Maria to let the situation go, attributing Maria concerns to jealousy and an unwillingness to move on from her ex-husband. According to Alejandra, holding on to these feelings would prevent a happy future. Maria chose not to attend therapy sessions with Alan after they ended. Around the same time, Alan's relationship with Alejandra progressed quickly. Within a few months of meeting, they moved in together. 2 months later, they decided to get married, but Alan was unaware of Alejandra's past issues and the reasons for her previous divorce. In April 2014, Alan visited his parents and took the opportunity to discuss his upcoming wedding. His parents were surprised to learn about the wedding and his partner, Alejandra, as they had never heard of her before. The marriage was registered a week after Alan met with his parents. Notably, Alejandra asked Alan not to invite her friends and family to the wedding, citing a modest budget as the reason. However, her father did attend the ceremony. At first, their life seemed like a dream come true. They were young, happy, and had many plans and aspirations. However, this didn't last long. Alejandra's volatile temperament soon became apparent. The relationship between them began to deteriorate rapidly. Alan was a private person who kept his personal life to himself, even from friends. As a result, few people knew what was happening behind closed doors. However, it was clear that the relationship was strained, and they no longer appeared happy. After marrying Alejandra, Alan distanced himself from his family. When his parents weren't invited to the wedding, leading to a complete breakdown in communication. Alan's friends noticed that his wife was becoming increasingly anxious and short-tempered, often behaving inappropriately. After a few embarrassing incidents, Alan became ashamed and started to limit their social interactions. Their arguments became a daily occurrence, often with no apparent reason or justification. Alejandra discovered her husband Alan's infidelity by snooping through his phone one evening. The racy messages from other women were the final straw. She claimed that when she confronted him about his cheating, he became violent, insulting, and humiliating. Feeling that the marriage was beyond repair, Alejandra decided to take drastic action. Instead of seeking therapy or counseling, she turned to a more sinister solution. Her focus shifted to devising the perfect plan to murder Alan. Alan, oblivious to his wife's intentions, continued his daily routine. He remained distant from his family, only making an effort to attend the annual family gathering to celebrate his grandfather's birthday. Alan attended the feast, but his parents made it clear that his wife, Alejandra, was not a welcome guest in their home. This snub infuriated Alejandra and further strained the relationship. Little did they know, this would be the last time the family saw Alan alive. On October 31, 2014, Alan sent a text message to his family, saying he had arrived home safely after his birthday party. However, he hasn't been in touch since then, and his absence from work for several days was unusual, as he was always responsible and diligent about his job. With the launch of a new business venture approaching, Alan's presence was crucial. But Alejandra had a sinister plan, which she set in motion after Alan returned from his birthday celebration. The couple had another argument, and Alejandra decided to eliminate her husband. Alejandra spiked his milk with a powerful sleeping pill, which Alan typically drank before bed, and then smothered him with a pillow. Alejandra took pleasure in watching her husband struggle to regain consciousness, pathetically trying to remove the pillow and take a breath. The most challenging part, however, was disposing of the body, a task she hadn't had time to plan for. Alejandra was in a desperate situation, as her husband Alan was too heavy for her to move on her own. With time running out, she rushed to her neighbor's vegetable garden to borrow an electric saw. She used the saw to cut Alan's body into pieces. This behavior seemed like something only a true sadist could accomplish. After dismembering the body, Alejandra packed the parts into garbage bags, taking the precaution of cutting off fingers and pulling teeth to hinder identification if the body was discovered. She stuffed the bags into suitcases to make it easier to remove the remains from the house without arousing suspicion. However, her plan was foiled as dawn approached. Alejandra struggled to leave the house with the heavy suitcases unnoticed. An elderly neighbor, who was awake due to insomnia, watched from her window and grew concerned about Alejandra's early and suspicious departure. It seemed strange that her husband wasn't helping her with the heavy luggage, and Alejandra's constant glancing around only added to the neighbor's unease. At dawn, Alejandra returned home, surprising her vigilant neighbor even more than before. It was later discovered that she had dispersed bags containing her ex-husband's remains across different neighborhoods to conceal her actions. As a new day began, she resumed her daily routine. On November 6, 2014, Mexican police made a gruesome discovery, a human torso with no teeth and no fingers. The entire police force was alerted due to the extreme brutality of the incident. Within a day, additional body parts were found in various locations throughout the city. Notably, the distance between the locations where the body parts were found was substantial. This would later be linked to Alejandra's prolonged absence from home. All the discovered body parts were sent to a leading forensic laboratory, where experts promptly confirmed that they belonged to the same individual. To avoid raising suspicions, Alejandra sent messages to Alan's relatives, claiming they were going on vacation and would be unreachable. Unbeknownst to her, Alan had recently distanced himself from his family and wasn't in contact with them. However, Alejandra's plan was foiled when her father, Alberto, called Alan's father's house to inquire about Alejandra's whereabouts. Alberto was concerned because he hadn't heard from her in a while, and her patients were worried about missing their counseling sessions. Later, Alberto called Alan's relatives again, informing them that Alejandra had been found and forcibly admitted to a clinic due to depression caused by her husband's infidelity. This alarming news prompted Alan's relatives to try and locate him, but they were unsuccessful. As a result, Alan's family sought police assistance. Forensic experts compared the remains of a recently discovered corpse with Alan's characteristics and confirmed a 100% match. Alan's relatives also identified the body, which was especially distressing for his grandfather. Shortly after the identification, his grandfather fell ill with heart disease and lost. The investigation led to a search warrant for Alan's home and office, where a patch of freshly dug earth was found in the backyard. Upon further digging, fingers and teeth were discovered. Alejandra was immediately apprehended, and traces of blood were found in one of the rooms, on the car trunk, and in the garage. Initially, Alejandra denied her guilt, hoping to escape punishment as she had with her previous husband's case. However, the investigation quickly resolved the case, aided by the testimony of an elderly witness whose account matched Alan's estimated time of death. Alejandra had used her position to obtain a powerful sleeping pill, a medication only accessible to doctors. This new evidence further implicated her in the case, establishing a link between Alejandra and the brutal murder of her husband. CCTV cameras played a crucial role in tracing Alan's movements, confirming that he entered the house but never left. The footage also showed that suitcases were removed from the house. On December 10, 2014, the jury delivered its verdict, sentencing Alejandra to life imprisonment for murder with brutality, attempted concealment of the crime, and abuse of her official position. Despite her father's efforts to use his connections and bribes to spare Alejandra from imprisonment, he was ultimately unsuccessful. However, he did manage to have the trial closed to the public and press, thereby minimizing further publicity. However, his actions were ultimately driven by self-interest and a desire to advance his career. As a result, his reputation as a specialist has been severely damaged, and it is unlikely that anyone will seek his expertise again. This is largely due to his failure to recognize the problems with his own daughter and the fact that he raised her to be a ruthless and calculating individual. The trial also brought to light the case of Alejandra's first husband, whose death had occurred under suspicious circumstances. Although the passage of time had made it difficult to gather evidence, there were suspicions that Alejandra's father may have been involved in the incident. Some even speculated that he had colluded with his daughter and that their actions had been motivated by a twisted scientific interest. Despite these suspicions, no concrete evidence was found to support this theory. Following numerous appeals from the victims' families, the sentence was ultimately increased to death. This was a highly unusual outcome, as such sentences are extremely rare in Mexico, particularly in modern times. Alejandra has been denied the opportunity to appeal the case, and her property, including their house, will be transferred to Alan's family. However, this offers little comfort, as the loss of a loved one can never be fully compensated. It has become clear that Alejandra was a pragmatic and cruel individual with significant mental health issues, despite medical examinations initially suggesting that she was sane. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Tina Watson. Tina Watson was born in West Germany on February 13, 1977. She was adopted by Tommy and Cindy Thomas on January 24, 1980. Tina met her future husband, Gabe Watson, while attending the University of Alabama in Birmingham, and they started dating in January 2001. Tina was diagnosed with a heart condition called paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia, PSVT. Despite this, she took diving lessons in January 2003 and earned her certification before marrying Gabe on October 11, 2003. At the time of their wedding, Gabe was a qualified rescue diver with 55 dives under his belt, while Tina had only dived 5 times. As Tina and Gabe's wedding day approached, Tina's anxiety grew. At 26 years old, she had already experienced 2 failed relationships and was now attempting marriage for the second time. Her first relationship with Scott McCulloch ended due to her mother's disapproval. Although her mother didn't have specific reasons, she wanted a better life for Tina and felt she was rushing into marriage. Tina and Scott eventually parted ways. Her second relationship with Stan Marks also failed, but this time, her parents weren't involved. They simply couldn't overcome their differences and mutually decided to end the relationship. It wasn't until Christmas Eve, at a party with friends, that Tina met Gabe Watson. Their relationship wasn't sparked by love at first sight, but rather by mutual support after recent breakups. 2 years into their relationship, Gabe proposed to Tina. Having learned from past experiences, Tina agreed, but only if she had her parents' blessing. In 2003, Gabe decided to ask Tina's parents for their blessing in a romantic gesture, choosing Valentine's Day. However, since Tina's father was away, the dinner was rescheduled for February 15th. During the dinner, Gabe announced his decision to spend the rest of his life with Tina. Tina's father, Tommy, responded with a straightforward question, "Do you love Tina?" However, instead of answering, Watson stuttered and remained silent. His father dismissed this reaction as mere awkwardness. Tommy then posed the same question to Tina, but she also avoided a direct answer. Instead, she expressed her fear of being alone at 26 years old. After considering their responses, Tommy gave his blessing to the young couple. The wedding preparations were well underway, with Tina preoccupied with her attire, guest list, and other details. Meanwhile, Watson was solely focused on planning their honeymoon. He had already decided on a trip to the Great Barrier Reef in the Pacific Ocean near Australia, where he intended to go diving. There isn't any consulting Tina about her preferences. To explore the sunken ship, Townsville Titanic, which sank in 1911, Gabe wanted Tina to learn scuba diving. However, Tina wasn't interested in diving, unlike Gabe, who was an experienced scuba diver with 55 dives under his belt. He had even completed a rescue diving course. Gabe would occasionally take Tina scuba diving in a pool with calm water and lifeguard supervision, but that was the extent of her experience. Gabe gave Tina an ultimatum: if she didn't learn to dive by their honeymoon, she would have to stay home while he went on his adventures. Gabe took out a loan to buy Tina her own diving equipment and pay for her lessons. However, Tina's first instructor was unimpressed with her skills and warned Gabe that she wasn't suited for open ocean diving. Gabe was furious and refused to listen, accusing the instructor of being a poor teacher and discontinuing the classes. The second instructor promptly gave Tina a passing grade, but also made a comment that she only made an effort to impress her future husband. Tina and Gabe got married on October 11th, and 2 days later, they embarked on a trip to Australia, which was funded by their wedding gifts totaling $10,000. During their honeymoon, Gabe dedicated some time to making Tina happy. They explored Sydney, visited the Sydney Aquarium, and went to the zoo. Although Tina was initially excited, her mood changed as they approached their visit to the Great Barrier Reef. On October 21st, they traveled to Townsville and boarded a boat in the evening, heading to a renowned destination popular among divers. However, employees at the diving company later reported that Tina and Gabe appeared inexperienced with diving equipment. Despite Gabe having completed diving courses and having some experience, he seemed uncertain about the equipment, handling it as if it were his first time. Before diving, Gabe assisted Tina in passing the required exam, which typically should be conducted individually. When the instructor offered Tina assistance underwater, she declined. The dive log noted a strong current that day, a crucial detail in the events that unfolded. As they prepared for the dive, Gabe helped Tina with the equipment they had purchased in the US. He rented an 11-liter tank for himself but chose an 8.5-liter tank for Tina, a volume considered small and potentially hazardous given her limited experience. Initially, the dive to the Townsville Titanic wreck was not possible. Tina needed an additional air tank, which stopped her from reaching the required depth. Furthermore, Gabe's underwater computer was not working. The computer calculates the needed diving and ascent speeds and shows the oxygen levels in the cylinders. After returning to the boat and resolving the computer issue, they attempted the dive again. The wreck was located 49 feet below the surface, and Tina was the first to descend, with Gabe following closely behind. According to Gabe's account, everything seemed normal at first. However, at some point, Tina stopped, began waving at him, and then signaled that she wanted to ascend. Gabe immediately recognized that she was panicking, which was not an uncommon occurrence for her. As they were already halfway to the surface, Gabe decided to calm Tina down and maintain their current depth for a while, rather than continuing the dive, allowing her to psychologically adjust to the pressure. Gabe said that Tina had been breathing deeply, which had not been safe, and Gabe had seen that Tina was starting to sink. Gabe had attempted to grab her belt to keep her afloat, but Tina had swung her arm forcefully, knocking his mask off. As Gabe had quickly put his mask back on, Tina had drifted further away. Gabe had tried swimming towards her but had been unable to reach her. Gabe had then made the decision to return to the surface to seek help from the lifeguards. During his ascent, Gabe had met two other swimmers, but despite his attempts to signal for help, the swimmer had ignored him. It's worth noting that there were two Asian men in the vicinity, but neither corroborated Gabe's account of seeking help. Subsequent police analysis of underwater computer readings revealed that Gabe had indeed attempted to swim after his wife for a short while before giving up. However, his ascent to the surface was controlled, as he stopped at each designated depth level as instructed. Other divers at the scene claimed that Gabe had sufficient opportunity to rescue his wife, but failed to act. The incident occurred early in the dive, and Gabe had enough oxygen to swim to the bottom and back to the surface. Rescuers on the ship responded quickly, locating Tina's body at a depth of 82 feet. Despite their efforts, including 40 minutes of artificial respiration on the deck, Tina was pronounced dead. Witnesses reported that Gabe kept his distance from his wife's body, appearing indifferent to the situation, and even exhibiting carefree behavior such as smiling with other passengers on the way to shore, which he later denied in court. The autopsy results for Tina revealed some inconsistencies. Although there were no obvious signs of a violent death, there were bruises on her neck and blood in her nostrils. However, these findings are not unusual given the 82-foot depth at which her body was discovered. Toxicology tests showed no alcohol in her system, but high levels of ibuprofen and paracetamol, which are commonly used to treat seasickness. A small amount of fluid was found in her lungs. The official cause of death was listed as drowning, but it is possible that she was already oxygen deprived before succumbing to drowning. Tina's diving gear was inspected by the Australian Water Police, but no issues were found. Initially, the police could have dismissed the incident as an accident caused by an inexperienced diver neglecting safety protocols, a sadly common occurrence. However, there were some suspicious aspects to the case, such as the inconclusive autopsy results. Additionally, Watson's unusual behavior, as reported by the diving team, didn't align with the expected actions of a grieving husband. These inconsistencies made it difficult to close the case, leading to a prolonged investigation. Gabe began to suspect that the detectives were investigating him. Furthermore, Tina's parents refused to accept the incident as a tragic accident and sought to hold their son-in-law accountable either for their daughter's death or for failing to assist her. The police observed that the suspect, Gabe, was in a state of shock. He displayed erratic behavior, crying and laughing uncontrollably, and twitching nervously. Gabe requested to call his father and complained of ear pain. He also begged his father to inform his wife's parents about the tragic event. Later that night, Gabe was released from police custody. He proceeded to the yacht owned by the company that had organized the diving trip to the reef. Gabe asked the company for a place to stay for the night, citing that the trip was initially supposed to last 2 days but was cut short due to his wife's death. He also requested a partial refund for the dive, as he never got to see the sunken ship. On October 24th, Gabe's mother arrived in Townsville to support her son and help him find a lawyer. At Gabe's request, they visited the morgue, where he wanted to see his wife one last time. Although Gabe was still considered a suspect, his actions were those of a grieving husband. He cried, held his wife's hand, and begged for her forgiveness, unaware that a police officer was standing outside, recording his actions on a tape recorder. Detective Lawrence questioned Gabe in court about his earlier statement next to Tina at the morgue, "I didn't mean to hurt you." Lauren sought clarification on what Gabe meant by it. Gabe had been traveling home with his wife's body and had a layover in Oakland. During this time, he sought medical attention for a sore ear and was held for evaluation at the airport. The investigation suggested that Gabe did this to avoid meeting Tina's father. However, it was revealed that ear problems are common among divers, which may have explained Gabe's condition. At Tina's funeral on November 5th, Gabe met with his father-in-law, Watson. In a visible gesture, Gabe removed his wife's wedding ring and placed it on his finger, covering his own ring. He also removed her earrings and handed them to Watson. After this encounter, the Thomas family did not interact with Gabe again that day. Later in the trial, Gabe was questioned about removing his wife's jewelry during her funeral. He simply smiled and shrugged, seemingly unwilling to confirm or deny it. Those who knew Gabe had mixed opinions about his character. Some found him to be kind and amusing, while others considered him cruel and controlling. However, they all agreed that Gabe and his wife, Tina, appeared unhappy together. Tina's friends corroborated what she had shared with her father at a family dinner on February 15th, that she had married Gabe out of fear of being alone and that this decision ultimately led to her demise. Furthermore, one of Tina's friends revealed that Tina had confided in her about being taken to an insurance company by Gabe, where she was forced to purchase a life insurance policy at an inflated rate, naming Gabe as the beneficiary. This account was verified by the insurance agent, who confirmed the details. The cab driver who drove Gabe and Tina to their yacht also testified that Tina had cried throughout the ride, while Gabe ignored her. Another friend of Tina's, Amanda Phillips, came forward with a disturbing story that shed more light on the true nature of Gabe and Tina's relationship. It was revealed that Gabe had secretly recorded Tina using the bathroom, edited the footage, and incorporated it into a Christmas celebration video. That would have been acceptable, but he chose to do it in front of a full house of guests during a general viewing. As everyone tried to explain to him that his actions were in poor taste, he laughed loudly while they gestured in frustration, tapping their fingers against their temples. Although removing jewelry during a funeral may seem like a shocking and condemnatory act by Gabe, a more disturbing incident occurred in 2008. During the trial, the jury was shown footage of Watson visiting Tina's grave, taking all the flowers, and carrying them away. The flowers were later found in a nearby trash can. Tina's father had noticed the missing flowers and set up a hidden camera among the monuments to catch the thief. However, he was shocked to see Gabe on the tape and was outraged by his actions. In court, Gabe claimed that he and his wife had discussed their own death on an extreme honeymoon and that she had requested no flowers on her grave. This excuse sounded strange and unlikely. Gabe claimed that Tina drowned while he attempted to put a mask on her face underwater. However, it was later revealed that this was impossible without an additional air source, which in this case was Tina's oxygen supply. In November 2008, Australian authorities arrested Gabe. His trial began on June 5, 2009, where he pleaded guilty to failing to save his wife. As a result, he was charged with negligent homicide and sentenced to 18 months in prison. Upon completing his sentence, Gabe returned to the U.S. However, a year later, he was charged with first-degree murder by a U.S. court. The prosecution alleged that his motive was to collect insurance payouts following his wife's death. Gabe's lawyer defended him by shifting the blame onto the diving company, claiming that its employees had failed to ensure tourist safety and were now afraid of losing their business due to potential license revocation. Regarding the insurance payout, Gabe received $33,000. However, he spent significantly more on lawyers and additional expert analysis. Despite this, the prosecution maintained that Gabe's expenditure was an attempt to avoid suspicion, as he could not assume he would be believed. The prosecutor also disputed the fact that Gabe, who had a degree in drowning rescue, was unable to save his wife. Gabe addressed the jury, reflecting on the past 7 years since the tragedy. He expressed that he has thought about that terrible day every day, and the public has blamed him, calling him a murderer. Gabe noted that nobody has shown him understanding or empathy, except for his late wife's parents, who he understands will never forgive him. Gabe acknowledged that he can be accused of not doing enough to save his wife, Tina, but he believes he has already been punished for that. He stated that he was afraid to die and wanted to live, which is why he didn't drown with his wife 7 years ago. Gabe emphasized that he still wants to live now. The court found no evidence of Gabe's guilt, and the jury declared him not guilty,